Welcome back to the Deep Share, everybody. First time live in quite a while. First time doing anything in quite a while. That's usually how it goes here these days. But I've said it to my friends and family, and I'll say it to you. The only time I'm ever really going to come back here is if I think it's important. So with that being said, we're going to dive into a lot of different things today, but the origins of progress and the concept of it and what it means to us today and how it's twisted throughout history. We're going to dig into that and so much more. But first, I want to introduce you to some people. Let's bring on our first guest, Duane Hayes.
Hey.
What's up, Duane?
Good. You can hear me and see me?
Absolutely.
Cool. I just finished a banana. I'm ready to go. I got my coffee here. Man. Looking forward to this conversation, Andy. Thank you for having me.
Pumped to have you here again. I'm glad we got to speak the other day, get into what we're going to dig into today, at length. And I think it's going to be one of the, the better things we've done. So,
yes.
And
let's hope so.
Let's bring everybody else in. We've got Doug McKenty of The Shift. How's it going, Doug?
Hello.
Doing good. How are you guys?
Excellent. Reading you loud and clear. Good to have you here. I just met Doug the other day, introduced to me by Duane, of course. And I think we got another heavy hitter here for sure. It's funny because Duane and I talk a lot about how almost nobody talks about this perspective. And then here comes Doug into the conversation and immediately is right on the same thread, so that really helps. And
it's
also
a really important conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I'm happy to have you here. And also introducing Nick Hayes. How's it going, Nick?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So Nick, you are the host of Hayes Reviews, correct?
Yes, that's it. It's a little YouTube channel project thingy that I started up about 3 years ago now. Just reading books in their entirety, from front cover to back cover on live streams. And just trying to figure out what the hell's going on, because I just started paying attention when we all got locked down, and I've got a lot of questions. And I think the best place to answer those questions is in books, as you might have figured out.
Absolutely, man. It looks like you got one hell of a collection behind you.
Oh, the thing is with books, every time you buy one, if it's a good book, it adds another 10 or 20 to your list. That's the problem.
For sure. Right. So we wanted to basically give Duane the floor for a while. He's got an entire presentation. You want to share screen as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah, give us a little background of what we're getting our audience into tonight.
Right. So previously, and you guys are all very aware of my research of Louis Brandeis, the Progressive Era, 1890 to 1920. This is really where a lot of my research has been centered on. And so we took that information and started moving forward, closer to, more contemporary times in our modern day. But we've never gone back to connect where the idea of progress and progressivism comes from. And this was a major question for me throughout the last 15 years of research, especially the last 10 since I've stumbled onto all of this progressive era stuff. So we're going to get into some deep history, even back to the 15th and 16th centuries, and the idea of progress. And of course, progress kind of has been around for a long time in other areas that we've probably never even thought of that we're going to get into today. So before I get into this presentation, I'd love to hear each of yours definition of progress or some examples in our modern day of progress that you guys notice as being problematic.
Anybody want to start?
I'll go.
All right.
So progress is buying lots and lots of old books on the cheap and feeding them into a machine, which cuts the spine off so that you can scan every page into an AI large language model, destroying the book in the process. That is progress. And if I had to come up with a definition, trying not to be influenced by your work, Duane, but failing. The way I would define it would probably be change. This is like things are progressing. We're moving forward. It's just change for change's sake. So that's all I got to say at this point.
Beautiful.
Doug, how about you?
Doug, oh, he said in the chat he's lost audio. He's lost
Oh,
Duane's
no.
audio. I wonder if that might be a Bluetooth headset type thing. You got to go with the wires,
Possibly.
Doug.
I'm not sure. Well, I'll give you my take on progress. It's similar to Nick's. It's undeniable change. Basically, progress towards an unnameable goal, it seems. But just the act itself needs to be carried out continuously.
Can you hear me, Doug? No?
I don't think he can hear any of us.
Yeah, so there's issues. He's saying that he can't hear me, my audio.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear
And
me,
I-
Doug? I don't think he's registering at all. He's
Okay.
uh,
And I heard some crackling right before that. So
Yeah, I did
everybody
as
check
well.
your wires and your cables. Make sure everything's sort of hooked up.
yeah, I'm not sure if he can even hear us say that, but
Can you hear us?
I think I'm
There he
yeah, I'm
is.
back.
Okay,
Sorry,
good.
My headphones stopped working. I'm just using the computer's speakers now. But
Yeah.
It's all good, man.
Okay, so you can hear me, Doug?
yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
Okay.
So,
So, Doug,
would
what?
you-
Yeah.
go ahead,
Go.
host.
What's your take on progress?
I mean, that's such a huge question, and it's such a fascinating. One of the things I've realized, I've been a lifelong libertarian, and I've always argued for free market principles, basically. And I've been open-minded, but the more I've delved into it, I just feel like freedom is a foundational ethical principle for me. I don't understand how anyone can argue that it's ethically justifiable to impose my will upon another person. I like this kind of healthcare, so I can make you pay for it for me. I mean, it's just, it seems like such an odd perspective, and yet as I've gone through life, and the more and more that I've looked into it, you learn about the powerful people that are engaged, and how do we fight the power. I never get to fight the power because I'm always fighting with my neighbor who's a progressive.
Right.
And this is the thing that's always, it started to boggle my mind that I'm spending all of my time arguing with my neighbor and nobody's getting anywhere towards promoting the cause of freedom. And how could this have possibly happened? I work pretty closely with Foster Gamble, who produced the Thrive documentaries, if you guys are familiar with those. And well, part of the original Thrive documentary, he goes into great detail about this concept he just calls follow the money, right? And we all understand that, follow the money. If you're looking for the motive of a crime, then you follow the money. You figure out who's motivated by it. And when I started following the money into the progressive movement, it consistently led me to the wealthiest people on the planet, the very people that are supposedly promoting free market capitalism, according to the progressive myth.
Right.
The very people that are supposed to love capitalism because it allows them to be competitive and then monopolize and centralize the means of production and yada, yada, yada. I mean, we all know this crazy story, this progressive story. And when you follow the money, you find that it's the robber baron class that pushed the progressive movement. And it's so obvious, even when you follow the history, and Duane knows this better than any of us. Once you dive into the history, it's the Rockefeller family, it's the J.P. Morgan family. It's like, these are the vanguards to this day. If you want to know what a progressive is going to be thinking in 5 years, go on the Rockefeller Foundation website right now. I mean, they're the vanguard. It's not a working class movement, and it never has been. And it's insane that people feel like they're fighting for working class rights when they're being progressive. It's also insane to me that they think they're being ethical. It's unbelievable. And I never even can get to the conversation about, how non-aggression is actually the ethical foundation for my belief system. And how can you justify your belief system and that you think you can impose this lifestyle that you've chosen on everyone, this particular type of education, this Prussian education system that's actually built on the military industrial complex, even the allopathic healthcare system that comes right out of the military industrial complex from World War I. I mean, these are our only options. You're telling me that these are a human right, that I'm forced to participate in this particular lifestyle that I don't believe in at all, but it's a human right, and you're ethical for imposing it on me. I mean, it gets crazier and crazier, as you guys all know.
Yeah.
So, and then when I am trying to explain to my neighbor why I believe in freedom and living in a free society, then I can't, no matter what I do, convince my neighbor that this is, like, to me, again, an obvious truth. And it's the brainwashing that I'm encountering, right? There's no other way to describe it. I've had people, I'll read them facts to their face, and then it's like it doesn't impact their thinking. And you're just like, what's going on here? I mean, it just gets to a point where you're like, wow. I mean, you realize that the wealthiest people among us have organized this entire campaign over hundreds of years, really, to brainwash the population into fighting for their own servitude. And
Right.
and when you try to liberate the people in your community, they don't even have the capacity anymore to logically think through their perspective. And I mean, so this is the biggest problem that we face on the planet today. Like, how are we going to liberate humanity in the face of the fact that much of humanity is actively fighting for their own enslavement right now while pretending like they're the good guys? I mean, it's an insane.
It's inverted. It's all inverted.
Yep, that's what I was going to say, is that it's all antinomianism. So as we go through this presentation, just understand what antinomianism is. It's just anti-tradition. So it's anti-constitution. It's anti, the traditional values of the West. And so it's really an overthrow of the ancient regime of the French Revolution. It's all the same even today. So Doug was talking about modern liberalism, and that is what drives it, is progressivism. You see it in all of their logos, from Hillary Clinton to Obama. It's about hope and change, right? And moving forward. So, Andy, you said inversion. I wrote that down because that's exactly what it is. And then ultimately, this is despotism. We see it in the literature. They talk about progressivism being a form of despotism or authoritarian rule or totalitarian rule. So we're told that this progressive movement is a bottoms up movement, but really, as Doug has explained there, it's top down. It's our engineers that have created this. This is really what I've stumbled upon. And I think that the best way to start to curb all of this and to fight back against it is to create, obviously, an alternative perspective. But it's videos, it's get-togethers and talks like this that I'm hoping are going to spark these conversations. And that's really why I invited all of you on, because you all bring a very important perspective and an understanding of progressivism in which we can now sort of elaborate on all of these ideas, hopefully spark some thoughts in your viewers and readers so they can say, aha, okay, now I see. And then they can go forward understanding where they are and how they're being manipulated a lot more successfully. They can navigate through. So that's really at the source and the core of all of this work, is a giant self-help movement towards decentralization. Like Aldous Huxley said, was the only thing that would ever stop it. So this is really where we're planting our flag. We're saying that we are really the truth movement. Those that understand progress and its negative effects on modern society are the truth movement. And anybody that's really hiding this or is unaware of it to this point is either unwittingly or wittingly working against us and still promoting this top-down form of government under moral and intellectual premises that are faulty, ultimately. And even those that drive it say it's faulty. So maybe if anybody has anything else to say, maybe now would be a good time, because I'm going to get into the progressive presentation.
Okay, yeah, just two things real quick, Duane, based on what you just said. Number one, this perspective that freedom, this is the classical liberal perspective, and I want people to really understand that. Like they had to twist, and talking about inversion. Inversion, I think, can come up over and over and over again. They twist the language over and over again so that they're trying to paint people who promote freedom as conservatives or somehow, or conservative Christians, and then they twist it in. Suddenly it's white nationalism or Christian nationalism or something. And it's like, no, I'm just talking about freedom. And then the second point that I wanted to make was exactly what you're talking about. Decentralization is how we fight this. It doesn't have to get complicated, right? I mean, there was a long time, and I know all the complicated arguments, just like I'm talking about, arguing with my progressive friends and never being able to get through. And finally, I realized one day that it's like, I just want to decentralize power. And you'll notice that the progressive always wants to further centralize power. Yeah. Even though they argue that a free market will automatically centralize and monopolize power, well, then why don't you work with me to decentralize power then? You know?
I mean, and you see centralized power. You see centralized power in even the Federalist Papers, right? This is really what they were battling, was centralized government versus no government. They all sort of are followers of Jeffersonian ideals, but they really implanted Hamiltonian ends to it all.
Exactly.
And,
well, that's why that.
Sorry, one more thing. What is conservatism but holding on to tradition, right? So this is why they've been vilified, conservatives.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think that the actual left-right paradigm, not the dialectic that they propose with the progressive movement, but the actual left-right paradigm should be sort of like the Christian conservative traditionalist versus the classical liberal that maybe has more sort of open-minded views, but really prioritizes freedom. Because I do understand the concerns of those who, the Christian conservative is going to impose their religious values through law. The classical liberal will say no. And honestly, though, we find a middle ground with the Protestant Revolution. And right now, it's actually really important that the classical liberals and the classical conservatives work together to fight the progressive scourge. I mean, that's what has to be prioritized at the moment.
100%.
Like, we have to put away the old school, and I'm talking about 100 and 200 years ago, these were the arguments between the classical liberals and the classical conservatives. And we have to unite against what is this socialist movement, the socialist movement that's being pushed by the upper classes, basically imposed, but has unfortunately convinced so many in the working class to work against their own interests.
I'll just add something quickly as well. Like at the minute, the book that I'm reading through on my channel is Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Renee Wormser, which is an absolute must read from the late 50s. And there's a section in here where he talks about liberalism and how the meaning of it has been changed, inverted, if you will, just totally hijacked. And there's a paragraph here that I think is worth mentioning because it summarizes and touches on what you just said really nicely. He writes, "I must here remind the reader of my definition of the term liberal as I use it throughout this book. I do not mean a liberal in the traditional sense. The liberal to whom I refer is almost the diametric opposite of the classic liberal, who is devoted to personal freedom. The liberal, in inverted commas, to whom I refer is at the very least tinged with Marxism, Fabianism, or some other variety of economic collectivism and political centralization. He is a statist, an advocate of highly centralized government, of state planning, of paternalism. His direction is away from personal and group management of affairs and toward government management." And I thought that touches on really nicely, right? It's an excellent book. I think I'm a little behind maybe all of you. I learned so much from Duane's presentations. It's what draws me to his channel because he's showing me quotes. I've got a stack of books here that I bought just off the back of watching your research, Duane. So that's always good. But I'm trying to catch up and I'm trying to participate. And books like this and little paragraphs like that really help us frame this information. And I think point to it to say, look, this was known in the 50s. It's not something new. It's not something we've all discovered in the last however long we've been looking at it. People have been voicing this and pointing it out, raising concerns about it for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I see most of all, is that this has been in plain sight all along. And once you finally see it, and especially through the way Duane has framed it through his work, you see that they've never really been speaking to the public in their works. Like, for instance, Aldous Huxley. They've been talking to their counterparts. They've been talking to their community when they talk about, the inevitable revolution and how it should be stopped and things like that.
Right.
These big concepts that go on. There's a way that it can all be completely out in the open. Not only that, when we get into Louis Brandeis, we see how how famous one can become on these principles and how popular in so many people's eyes, generations of people respecting these heroes of democracy and the 20th century, basically. And what we're going to show here tonight through Duane's presentation is that it's quite the opposite. Again, we see inversion, antinomianism, it goes all the way back. So
Yep.
I would even
I'll
say
bring
that
up-
Gnosticism is a form of antinomianism, technically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it goes all the way back.
I was just going to bring up one other thing because Nick brought up in the book the idea of how paternalistic the government is and these socialists and progressives actually are, because it's so funny that they couch themselves so often in fighting the patriarchy. And it's like there is no more patriarchal philosophy than socialism, where they literally think that a centralized authority can dictate every aspect of our lives, our healthcare, our education, I mean, like they're worried about the conservative Christians making homosexuality illegal or something, when it's like, look at what you all are doing. You're dictating everything that our children can learn from age 5 to age 18, trying to dictate it all the way through, and really they've taken control, as Duane, of higher education as well. So it's just like, when they talk, it's so nonsensical. It's so inverted. I mean, I'm sure we're going to come back to this over and over again. That's what makes it so frustrating.
Well, the progressives have an inability to actually observe their own actions. They're really outwardly looking. There's no inward. And if there was a word I could describe them as a whole, really, it's narcissistic.
Right.
Whenever you engage with them, they don't want to know information. They'll not say you're right, I'm wrong. They'll never apologize.
Right.
So really, I think that this is what this top-down progressive movement over 100 years has really established, is these progressive neighbors that just won't listen, and they're so brainwashed that they all, no matter what part of the country you engage with your progressive neighbor, they're going to say the exact same things because they're watching TV.
Right.
They're taking their cues from these top-down that are social engineers. So without any further ado, first of all, I'm going to offer my definition of progressivism, and then we're going to go to the elite for their definition, Herbert Spencer. Okay, so my definition of progressivism is the generation of new knowledge, moral, linear, humanistic, long-term endeavor based in scientific advancement and industrial achievement towards the universal betterment of the human condition. So the myth of human progress is what we're talking about. This is really what's established in the 1500s. And so following my research on the American progressive era, I began to ask myself a question: where does this idea of progress come from? Because we'd established also already the forward, the 20th century story of progressivism, but we still hadn't found the source of where it all came from. So we've been using proper books. In all of our research, you can see that I've got a bunch of books back there too. Here's the letters of Louis Brandeis. And then
Primary sources.
Yeah, and we've been basing a lot of it off of Gershom Scholem, not just this book, Kabbalah, but he's got several. And he is the leading voice in Jewish studies. He's really the one that created and founded the actual practice of investigating Jewish history and the Kabbalah. So he's like the primary guy. So we're not making any of this up. We're pulling it out of primary source documents of people that have spent their entire lifetime looking into the ideas that we're going to go into here today. So
Sounds good.
Yeah. So where does this idea of progress come from? Progress is based on three main pillars. We all know this probably by now: scientific, technological advancement, industrial achievement, and international world order. We know it in America as military preparedness, efficiency, and scientific governance. So Francis Bacon, we have to consider here. He's the grand architect of the idea of human progress. If you listen to mainstream, his New Atlantis outlined a scientifically organized and efficient society where innovation aided in the comfort and wealth of its citizens. So by linking scientific empirical method with social improvement through human effort and reason. So this is a key thing to remember, is that they are efforting this through action, human action. They're gonna make it happen through the human will. And so he laid the groundwork for all others after, really, in many ways. And we see many repeat this idea of bringing about a utopia through human will across the board, whether we're talking Christianity, religion, progressivism, socialists, communists, Marxists. And this is what we see as they all unite. And if you're familiar with my work, you know that where that started at the turn of the 20th century with the Fabians. And so Darwinism and Herbert Spencer's theory of social Darwinism have a presupposed progressive element of forward movement built right in. This idea that humans are always going to evolve and progress. So all of the Abrahamic religions have a beginning and an end, right? There is an eschatological aspect to the Abrahamic religions. There's a beginning and most definitely an end. So I want to start here if I can share this. We're going to read a little bit of Herbert Spencer because this is really the time in which it started. These are the people that started it, and he wrote a book. Hopefully you can see that. Called Progress, Its Law and Cause. Are you guys seeing that now? Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you. I was going to ask, are you meant to be sharing anything at the moment? Because I can't see your presentation if you are.
Yeah,
Yes,
Andy,
I've
you're
got
muted.
share on.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out here. Sorry, guys.
Ah,
I'm new to this whole. There we go.
that's
Yeah.
it. That's it. That's it.
Hey!
Yeah.
So
There we go.
incredible title from Herbert Spencer, the founder of social Darwinism.
Right.
Okay. And so when we get into that book, I'm just going to read a little bit of this because it's pretty important. I might not have the actual. There we go. Okay, so it talks about the different aspects or forms of progressivism. I might not actually have that page here, which
I know
helps
you were
us
throwing
understand.
this together as quickly as you could beforehand.
So there's divisions of progress, and there's philosophical progress, but there's also industrial advancement idea of progress. And so Herbert Spencer bases it all off of the same sort of social Darwin aspects. And in creating a homogeneous or what do they call it? Hive mind. So
Right.
toward an economic
for it.
aggregation of the whole human race. Okay. So
Yeah, remember
I don't
these
know
people
where-
talk about diversity too all the time. Like the amount of projection is just unreal to me. Where it's like the Republican in the modern day is supposed to be the racist, but it's like it was progress that pushed eugenics for decades.
Yes. Yes.
You know, they talk about diversity, and here we can read in their founding documents that that's not at all what they're about. And really, their
Right.
idea of diversity, even now, it's another inversion. It's about assimilating
Sure.
people of minority cultures into the dominant culture.
Oh yeah.
And the only viewpoint that they're not inclusive of is ours.
Right.
You know, talking about classic liberalism and the things that we're going to talk about today. So here we have on page 234, Progress, Its Law and Cause, and they are thought to constitute progress simply because they tend to heighten human happiness. This is another thread that we're going to see, this pursuit of happiness, whether it's Jefferson, Moses Dobrushka, the real founder of social science, or our modern day belief. It's hope and happiness. So, but rightly to understand progress, we must inquire what is the nature of these changes considered apart from our interests, ceasing, for example, to regard the successful geological modifications that have taken place in the earth as modifications that have gradually fitted for the habitation of man, and as therefore a geological progress. We must seek to determine the character common to these modifications, the law to which they all conform, and similarly in every other case, leaving out sight concomitants and beneficial consequences, let us ask what progress is in itself. in respect to that progress which individual organisms display in the course of their evolution, this question has been answered by the Germans. The investigation of Wolf, Goethe, and von Baer have established the truth that the series of changes gone through during the development of a seed into a tree or an ovum into an animal constitute an advance from homogeneity of structure to heterogeneity of structure. In its primary stage, every germ consists of a substance that is uniform throughout, both in texture and chemical composition. The first step is the appearance of a difference between two parts of this substance, or as the phenomenon is called in physiological language, a differentiation. Each of these differentiated divisions presently begins itself to exhibit some contrast of parts, and by these secondary differentiations become as definite as the original one. This process is continuously repeated, is simultaneously going on in all parts of the growing embryo, and by endless such differentiations, there is finally produced that complex combination of tissues and organs constituting the adult animal or plant. This is the history of all organisms, whatever. So you can see that they're combining, they're trying to parallel the life of a plant or an animal to the human being. So now we propose in the first place to show that this law of organic progress is the law of all progress, whether it be in the development of the earth, in the development of life upon its surface, in the development of society, of government, of manufacturers, of commerce, of language, literature, into the complex through successive differentiations holds throughout. From the earliest traceable cosmic changes down to the latest results of civilization, we shall find that the transformation of the homogeneous into the heterogeneous is that in which progress essentially consists. So with the view of showing that if the nebular hypothesis be true, the genesis of the solar system supplies one illustration of this law. Let us assume that the matter of which the sun and planets consist was once in a diffused form, and that from the gravitation of its atoms, there results a gradual concentration. By the hypothesis, the solar system in its nascent state existed as an indefinitely extended and nearly homogeneous medium, a medium almost homogeneous in density and temperature and other physical attributes. So they're likening us now through the idea of our universe and how it allegedly evolves and moves forward too. So in a lot of ways, this is the myth of human progress right here, and Spencer is establishing it. So I would recommend that everybody go and read a good portion of that for the social engineer's definition of progress. And I was only able to underline one important place, but we could keep reading there. I would rather not, but just to give you an idea of that's what Herbert Spencer is laying down as the definition of progress. It's an all-encompassing, it involves everything, and it's based on what they learned through plants and animals in the solar system. And so then we move on here to really why I say that progress starts in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Okay, so Rudolf II is who you're looking at here. You guys still with me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it's tough for me to, like, once I have pictures up and the text that I'm reading, I can't see anybody.
Okay.
So just so everybody knows,
We're here.
I've just got my work here.
We're attentive,
Beautiful.
taking notes.
Okay, so Rudolf II is famous for opening up his court and allowing all kinds of occultists and scientists to start experimenting. So he's a Habsburg Holy Roman Empire. King of Bohemia, shifted culture from accepting ancient or traditional authority to generating new knowledge through experimentation and observation. So this is really the first moments of scientific empirical examination of our surroundings and our setting, the fundamental prerequisite for the idea of progress. So when you define progress as advancement of new knowledge and experimentation and observation through science, this is really where it starts under this man. So he invites Johann Kepler and Tycho Brahe, John Dee, Edward Kelly, and the Maharal of Prague to come and visit, to experiment, to learn. And it's really the first interdisciplinary meeting. So it's really kind of like the first Macy conferences, if you know anything about Macy conferences, this is what they wanted in our modern day. They brought together all of the specialists and started to work their own individual fields of expertise into each other's to develop a holistic program to control in our modern times. And that's really what MK Ultra comes out of. So Rudolph during this time invites Kepler and Brahe. These are two competing theories of our universe, right? Kepler is heliocentric and Brahe is a hybrid geocentric heliocentric model. So the fight is between a heliocentric and a geoheliocentric. There isn't a heliocentric versus geocentric model. Brahe is the closest, and he dies of an illness, and Kepler then takes all of his work, and this is really how we know Kepler today. On his deathbed, Brahe asked Kepler to publish his work and make sure that he didn't live a life in vain, except Kepler took his work and presented it as his own and sort of cherry-picked as to what he wanted to have published. So that's a whole other interesting story we could probably spend an entire podcast on, but for this one today, we have to move on. So the Royal Society and the idea of the Invisible College are also derived from this time period, in that John Dee and Edward Kelly are there. So this is Rosicrucianism, the Rosy Cross, and this is another interesting sort of confluence of men and people. Royal Society is one of the oldest controlling societies of our society today. So Rudolph II moves from Vienna to Prague to free himself of authoritative constraints of the church and of other monarchies. He takes his movement from Vienna to Prague, takes it to Prague Castle, and the Brandeis Castle is where most of this experimentation happens. Brandeis on the Elbe is a city just north of Prague, and this is where Louis Brandeis and his family take his name from. And so it's interesting with a little bit of research that, the origins of progress happen at a castle that's named after him, or named in the same vein, I suppose. I haven't been able to trace back what the Brandeis name is or who it is attributed to, first and foremost, but I think it is a description of the geography and the land area, not a person. So this is where
I came to as well. It seems to be that they took the name from the land that they were originally living on.
Right. So it's not an ode to the Brandeis family. It's just the Brandeis name is taken from there. This is often what happened, especially when emigrating, right? You take the name of the city that you came from. You see this consistently. So this this movement of Rudolph II to bring together scientists, alchemists, occultists, even necromancers, sorcerers, was in an effort to find the Philosopher's Stone. So a mythical object or substance that turns ordinary metals into gold, symbolizes spiritual perfection, divine illumination, or immortality, and leads to the perfection or purification of mankind. So you can see that he's of the same mindset here. He wants to push forward new technology to help in the advancement and the happiness, really, ultimately, of modern society. So this sets the stage for the scientific and industrial revolutions. This is upstream of both of those. And really, they're combining this scientific experimentation with Enlightenment thinking. So this is really where our modern day universe is literally created, by Brahe and Kepler and through these investigations. And so as a side note, Louis Brandeis' uncle/father-in-law, Joseph Goldmark, is the inventor of red phosphorus while working in Vienna along with his mentor Anton von Schroeder. And Chaim Weizmann, the leader of Zionism, was the inventor of acetone. So when you see people like this, you have to look at them as modern alchemists. There's no doubt about it. Okay. So we'll flip through a couple of these pictures. This is Tycho Brahe. Many liken him to flat Earth or the geocentric model. This is another picture of Rudolph. You can see the chin. It's sort of the telltale sign of a Habsburg is that forward protruding chin. Here is John Dee, who is an incredibly important person to understand when you look at sort of the origins of progress in the life of England and Britain. Nick, this guy, I'm sure that you are familiar with John Dee. He's kind of like the first, I mean, he sat in the courts of all kinds of monarchies, and he was really a special advisor, a technical scientific advisor to the monarchs, much like
He signed his
Brandeis.
letters 007 as well, didn't he, famously?
Right. Yes. So this is who most people will attribute 007 to.
He was so important that we never, ever learned about him in school.
Right. So here's Kepler with a globe. That's what he looks like. And then this fellow also, the character, this is a real man, but they characterized him in this image. And I'm sure all of us are familiar with this. You talk about inversion and as above, so below. This character actually is there too. Michael Sendovogius is his name. And so this is what you see. These are the people that are hanging around Rudolph II and trying to push forward and find new information for the perfectibility of the human being. Okay, and so this also goes back to this place here. The Majoral of Prague is an alchemist. He is a follower of all of this, and he meets with Rudolph in his court, and Rudolph actually legislates laws into place to protect the Jews against blood libel. This is really the connection there. And we'll get back into this synagogue here momentarily. There is some stuff on Moses Dobrushka I'd like to actually cover here first.
Now, that's the man that we can't even find a picture of, right? And he has like 6 different names.
Moses Dobrushka, yes. So
yeah,
I'll leave it on that image. This is a very important synagogue. This is one of, if not the oldest continually functioning synagogue in the world. It is one of, but it holds that title. If you were to internet search it, that's what they'll say about this. And it's called the Old New Synagogue. And in the attic is where they kept apparently Golem. They created a man out of clay to protect the Jews against accusations of blood libel. But we are getting ahead of ourselves here. So first of all, Moses Dobrushka, like you say, he's got several names. This is really the founder of social science, and many intellectual sort of scholarly circles are now looking at this and admitting that, you know, social sciences were invented long before Auguste Comte or Henri de Saint-Simon. And Dobrushka, again, here upstream of both of those two. And both those that we look at, Saint-Simon and Comte, as founders of social science, both exhibit stuff in their work in which you know that they took it from Dobrushka. At this point, very few are even actually arguing it. So his sociological theory built out of his universal constitution concerned 5 areas. 1 was science as an answer to social issues. 2 was the need for social change and institutional evolution. 3 was the redefinition of the individual within society. 4 is the determinants of happiness. And 5 is models of government and recruiting of public officials. So we've already kind of extensively talked about a lot of those things. And you can see here in 1700s, just prior to the French Revolution, we see Moses Dobrushka. He is a radical member of the Jacobin Club. So these are the guys that really started the French Revolution, single most influential political group during the revolution. And at this time led by radical Saint-Just and Maximilien Robespierre. The Jacobins called for the execution of King Louis XVI and for the right to vote for all adult men. So this is suffrage, regardless of wealth, social status, or property ownership. They were proto-socialists, the ancestors of socialism. And what are they doing but establishing constitutions? So DeBruska calls for not just the reconstruction, but the deconstruction first. So we must tear it down and build it again. This is a pattern that we see played out after him throughout. So published in the same year as the 1793 National Convention of the French Revolution, his Philosophie Sociale gained DeBruska a high level of notoriety in serious intellectual circles. His theories on a new democratic society were widely read by well-known social contract theorists, economists, and philosophers of the day, including Immanuel Kant, and as I've previously mentioned, Henri de Saint-Simon and Auguste Comte. Philosophie Sociale was a further development in social control, ultimately. DeBruska largely pioneered the idea of using mass sociological data collection and applied legislation to steer society towards an ultimate goal of universal hope and happiness. So that is social science, the mass accumulation of sociological data, the observance of it, the calculating of it, and then deriving solutions and then applying those back into society is exactly what Norbert Wiener created in the feedback loop, founder of cybernetics and one of the key invitees to the Macy conferences. So there's this ominous continuity now you're starting to see between these seemingly completely disparate historical figures. But this idea of social science starts to permeate through all of our controllers. So the US Universal Constitution of DeBruska is two parts. The first part meant to represent the body of rules. So there was 70 principles of cause and effect. So really just laying down law from which behavior is observed and data is collected. While the second part was applying that data through legislation and regulation in order to modify societal behavior. He says it in his works. Maybe I can find that.
You know, it's so fascinating to me that they're talking about data collection. And here we are today dealing with these data centers. I mean, I think from the perspective of the elites, the reason why their socialism continuously fails is because they haven't been able to get enough data, right? They haven't had enough. They haven't had enough data.
Exactly.
So now they're building these data centers so that they can process all the data in the whole world, you know, so that they can figure out exactly how to control the entirety of humanity.
And that is the furthest extent of their imagination into our modern times of these same people and these same ideas. 100%. So out of the Encyclopedia Judaica, Volume 5, we've got a description of Moses DeBruska. So I'll use the actual sources so everybody knows I'm not making any of this up. So Frankist and French revolutionary.
Oh,
so
boy.
His mother was a Chandelle, and she was the first cousin of Jacob Frank. You can see there. Her house served as a meeting place for the secret adherents of the sect. Okay, and most interesting here for, you know, the rest of this story, understand that he comes from a small circle of rich tax farmers. So what are those guys? They are, instead of the government or the monarchy having to run around and gather tax, or, you know, if somebody hasn't paid their taxes, they hire these guys, tax farmers, and they go through whatever measures they deem necessary to get the tax money for the monarchies and the kings and queens. And so you can see, obviously, that they would adhere themselves to kings and queens if they're going out and doing the necessary work to get their money for them, right? So they're also controlled the tobacco administration during the regime of Maria Theresa. And that's not just one small area. They controlled the entire aspect of tobacco. So we see these parallels in how when the Brandeis landed in America too.
To bring it to the present day as well, on my sorry to cut you off, but just to add something, on my live stream this morning, I was putting together an introduction. I was looking at the behavioral insights team here in the UK, in England, and this is the world's, they say on their website, the world's premier nudge unit, right? They've expanded and grown. Now there's 200 of these all over the world. And when you go to their About Me page, their brag is that they got more people to pay their taxes, and they improved tax compliance, and they solved the problem of people not paying their taxes, you know, and that's their big flex is that's what we managed to achieve. And then this was, as I was preparing an introduction about behavioral science and how it still exists in the modern day. And the UK government just put up a page on the website of a collection of behavioral science research that is supposed to inform policymakers. It's a very new page on their site, put up maybe this month even. And the only thing they've got on there is this long 47-page report about advising people how to deal with extreme heat and wildfires. And there were 7 authors on this report, right? 7. One of them was the head of the behavioral insights team. And what did they do? They used a large language model to crunch a lot of public facing communications and point out where there was confusing, mismatched information. I'm like, if most people can't figure out what to do in the event of heat and fire, then we're screwed. It's just game over if people need to be spoon-fed that advice and information, which the UK government apparently thinks we do.
Yeah, and you can see that they're using observation, collecting of sociological data to further push society. And really, if you look at one of the modern founders of liberalism, John Stuart Mill, this is what he calls for on liberty, is one party of order, one party of progress, and to pit them against each other under hostile banners. That is literally what he says. So we can see through that literature that what liberalism is, and it really is sort of an experiment or a social engineering tool. Changes your perspective on liberalism.
Yeah, especially the way you put it, like a tool like that. And I never realized how strongly it was used until I've, gained some years and can look back in retrospect at my high school years and my upbringing as a teenager and rebellion. We talked about this, you, me, and Doug the other night. Rebellion against the status quo was not something that like evil people were doing. It was in every single movie pushed to teenagers. It was in every movie pushed to children, go against the family, against the norms of society. And now I'm not saying that society's perfect by any means. We've talked about it for 5 years on this show, how imperfect society is, but this is kind of on a different level. This is a different situation. This is using our good intentions of trying to right the ship and pulling people in to their own version of what that means. And of course, breaking down the system is always how it's done. Revolution is always how regime change occurs and how they just slip through the cracks.
Yep. And the family is sort of the primary strength, right? The nuclear family. And also, Nick, you mentioned the word nudge. That just brings to my memory Nudge Theory by Cass Sunstein, 20th century author talking about the same stuff of how to nudge society. So after his release from prison in Czestochowa, his brothers are actually in jail with Henri de Saint-Simon, by the way. Dobrushka received a Talmudic education and was also initiated into the Kabbalistic teachings of Sabbateanism. He began to study German literature and foreign languages as an adolescent. In 1773, he married the adopted daughter of Chaim Popper, one of the richest Jews of Prague, and about the same time began writing in Hebrew and German in the spirit of the early Haskalah, producing, among other books, Sefer HaShashua. I should probably not attempt to pronounce any of that. But Dobrushka later engaged in business and amassed a considerable fortune as one of the chief army suppliers in the preparation of the war against the Turks. So here he is making fortunes off of military preparedness. So in 1778, he was ennobled by Emperor Joseph II, with whom he enjoyed some favor and to whom he dedicated enthusiastic poetic eulogies, taking the title of Franz Thomas Edler von Schönfeld. So this is the first name change that he has. And he became active in the mystic circles of Freemasonry, into which he introduced elements of Kabbalah, particularly of the Sabbatean nature, but retired from active participation in 1784. In the late 1780s, he lived as a wealthy man with wide connections in the upper circles of Vienna and established contact with the famous writers of Germany, continuing to enjoy the favor of Leopold II. So here he is, he's an advisor again. You can see that they're filling these roles of advisors next to, whoever the major controller is. And Dobrushka was named, and people wanted him to be, when Jacob Frank died in 1791, to be the next Messiah, to which apparently he turned it down. So Dubrushka, or Schoenfeld, became an ardent admirer of the ideals of the French Revolution, and his career is henceforth closely connected with it. Arriving in Strasbourg in March 1792, he changed his name again to Gottlob Junius Frey, joined the Jacobin Club, and immediately involved himself in French politics. He moved to Paris in June, joined the Jacobin Club there, took part in the storming of the Tuileries, and wrote a philosophical and constitutional book called Philosophie Sociale. So same year as the reign of terror of the French Revolutions really got ugly, that same year that he publishes these. And his sister marries one of the leading Jacobins. So he's deeply connected here, familially, ideologically. So here he is, Francois Chabot, a Jacobin demagogue who married his sister Leopoldine in October of that year, shortly after he was denounced by Austrian and German emigres, and died at the guillotine eventually. Okay, but this guy is a member of the Illuminati. He's a Freemason. He's a Jacobin. So these are really the Jacobins were the radical aspect of the French Revolution. And so he's also the founder of the Asiatic Brethren. This is the first German Freemasonic lodge to accept Jews into their membership. Okay, so this guy's hugely important, and only now is getting some of the recognition that he's deserved. And so this book here has been critical to allowing me to see more of his influence on our modern society. Silvana Greco, Moses Dubrushka, and the invention of social philosophy, utopia, Judaism, and heresy under the French Revolution. Heresy really qualifies as antinomian, against tradition too, right? But in a theological aspect. So he is a businessman, scholar, social philosopher, born into a Jewish family in Moravia, converted to Catholicism, much like Zabbatai Zevi did with Islam.
Yep.
Yeah, and Jacob Frank did in Catholicism. We see this conversion, but it's not. They're literally infiltrating on purpose, and we see that in their own literature. Gershom Shalom has showed this through his research as well. So, accused of conspiring on behalf of foreign powers, he was guillotined on April 5th, 1794, at the height of terror, on the same day that Georges Jacques Danton was also on the gallows. You can see here, as she goes on, he's influenced Immanuel Kant. She even mentions Gershom Shalom. Okay, so this is a real historical figure. We just don't have any pictures of him. And once, at least in my belief, once we get this deep into the history of it all, we start to see that there isn't any pictures of these people. We start to get into these rich families of Central Europe, these 12 families that often people talk about. There isn't pictures of them.
Yeah, it's so strange. This man is so famous, and there's not a single image of him.
So influential, right? Yet we don't know anything about him. And it's much like Brandeis and much like everybody else we see in this. So 1791 is the year that Jacob Frank dies. And it's the same year that the World's Fair, like the first ever World's Fair, happens in Prague, 1791. And this is where it happened, the Clementinum. And so the World's Fair combines all three of the things that we'd already talked about: scientific experimentation, industrial achievement, and international relations. This is really what embodies a World's Fair. If any of you have ever been to one, this is really what it all encompasses. And so this is a driving force of internationalism, of popularizing the idea of all of this. And the World's Fair is still very influential today. I went to the 86 Expo in Vancouver as a kid, and I was very impressed by it all, but I didn't quite understand the mechanisms and why there is World's Fair until now. So that first World's Fair was held here, the Clementinum. And so there was astrological observations happening there and all kinds of pushing of the envelope of scientific research. So this is a Baroque room in the Clementinum. That was essential. You can see it's littered with globes. And this really is, if you look at like the Metropolitan Club in Washington, where all these rich elites go to hang out, this is almost exactly the layout, the exact same thing. A room that looks just like this, filled with books. So just saying there's similarities throughout history here.
I really like the variation on the checkerboard floor as well in that room. You know, it's not the typical Masonic chessboard. They've actually, it's the same motif, but a variation. And yeah, still very much reminiscent of that duality.
Sure. It's still sending the same message through symbology. Really, symbology is mysticism, right? Mysticism is meant to pass forward information without words. So some, you know, the initiated walk into these rooms, they look at it a lot different than a normie who's visiting Prague as a tourist. So just some internal pictures of the Clementinum. This is the astrological tower where Brahe and Kepler, I'm sure, were hanging out, fighting or the like.
Wow. Shaking hands for the most part, I'd say.
Yeah, possibly, right? Being a dialectic of their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so from Gershom Shalom, the Messianic idea of Judaism, page 26, 27, he talks about progress, how Messianism became tied up with the idea of the eternal progress and infinite task of humanity perfecting itself. In this process, the concept of progress itself, a non-restorative element, became central for rational utopianism. The restorative facts lost their effect to the degree that the national and historical elements of the Messianic idea were superseded by a purely universalistic interpretation. So whenever we see that word universal, really in the context of this conversation today and this history, just think Moses Dobrushka and his universal constitution, because ultimately that was what was created at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, the League of Nations, and the eventual United Nations is this modern version of Dobrushka's universal constitution. So the anarchic element in utopianism no longer frightened the freest among them as something destructive, but rather counted as a positive element in the progress of mankind, which was developing from old forms to ever higher and less restricted forms of human freedom. So you can see that he's talking inversion here too, of how it's been inverted. So I've been collecting examples of the word progress and examples of how progress has sort of shown itself in our modern day. And so one of the key guys here, one of the key artifacts of this whole investigation is the Sabbatean will of Gottlieb Weil. This is Louis Brandeis's direct uncle. And in the late 1800s, possibly the early 1900s, he submits this Sabbatean will from New York, and Gershom Shalem goes in and I believe translates it and does some deep research on it. And so we're just showing some of the provenance here, where they say this is the last will of Gottlieb Weil, a member of the Sabbatean sect in Prague, who later, 1849, settled in America as a member of a group of Sabbatean families about whose emigration we have the monograph of Miss Josephine Goldmark. Josephine Goldmark, working directly with Louis Brandeis. She's the sister of Alice Goldmark, Louis Brandeis's wife, cousin. And so in Pilgrims of 48, she talks about a family migration to America, and they openly talk about how they had Frankist background. So Gottlieb settled and died in New York, 1881, and it is there that the will was written. So there you go, late 1800s. According to
Let me tell you real quick that ChatGPT and other LLMs will desperately try over and over again to convince you that there's no need to look at the connection that Louis Brandeis's family was filled with Sabbatean Frankists. It's just a coincidence. Don't look any further at it. It's they weren't even practicing, really. It's not a big deal.
Yep, and because they removed the sensational religious aspects of Frankism and secularized it through administrative, legislative, and regulatory law, this is how they are able to skirt that issue fairly easily. They say, well, look, there's no Louis Brandeis never got caught in sexual orgies or any of these sensational aspects, and so
No
even
magic,
his mother,
no nothing.
right? Even his mother says that she wanted to impose into her children a dislike for all organized religion, and this is really at the basis of Frankism. So,
Bingo, yeah.
from Melvin Urofsky to Jonathan Sarna, all of these official biographers of Brandeis, and including his great grandson, whom we will end the show with, all diminish his importance to Frankism. And so this is how, for over 100 and something years, we've been kept from Brandeis, is because he has an army of gatekeepers that started with his law clerkship, that have written books throughout the 20th century to protect Brandeis's legacy. So there it is, Gottlieb Weil, the great uncle of the late Justice Brandeis and a first cousin of Zacharias Frankel. So this is Gershom Scholem linking Gottlieb Weil and Justice Brandeis. This is a for sure thing. So it is therefore the latest document written by a Jewish Sabbatean who obviously never abandoned the basic tenets of the doctrine which he was taught in his father's house. So they go on to other names here, Moses Porge, and we're starting to get into those money families of the Central Europe, right? To start to explain that, this Illuminati conspiracy theory actually has some weight to it. And, we'll get into some other very controversial, polarizing topics here that the mainstream world would tell you is extreme conspiracy theory. But we're actually showing through this understanding of Brandeis's life that this is actually the literal connections that we've been looking for, to take it out of theory and put it into actual documented history. So the Weils were one of the aristocratic old Jewish families of Prague, as were the Brandeises, and took a leading part in the Sabbatean and later Frankist groups, which at the time attracted considerable attention and whose importance has not yet been sufficiently evaluated. The father of the testator, that being Gottlieb, Aaron Bierweil, and particularly the testator's two uncles, Jonas Weil of Prague and Emanuel Weil, were outstanding personalities among the Bohemian and Moravian Sabbateans, the two last mentioned generally being considered spiritual leaders. And further research shows that they were actually funding Eva Frank. Well, they were funding Jacob until his death, but especially after his death and Eva Frank took over the leadership of Frankism as a Shekinah, female energy, they were deeply funding and directing. So it also shows in the 48ers, this book by Josephine Goldmark, in which they talk about this little picture of Frank, Eva Frank. And all of the committed families to this Frankism and remaining quiet about it were given as a commemorative sort of keepsake, a small miniature picture of Eva Frank. And it is rumored that both Brandeis and Frankfurter had pictures of Eva Frank on their Supreme Court desks. No way to really confirm that, but there are several legitimate researchers on Jewish study in the Kabbalah and Brandeis that have all said that. I've yet to find real great provenance on it other than secondary source material. So, is there anything anybody wants to say?
Well done so far. I mean, it's very clear.
Yeah. So I'm just going to try to stay on task here.
You'll have to share again if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. There is something here that we skipped over. Yes. So, okay. So the Maharal of Prague, this old new synagogue, seems like a strange place to be researching the origins of progress. That is exactly what we're seeing. Need a
Is
second
that
here.
the same synagogue that an infamous person is seen in a photograph of?
Yes, we're going to get to that.
Okay. All right.
That'll be near the end.
No
But
problem.
yep, exactly right. So here's the synagogue, the old new synagogue. Go back to this picture because there's some following it that I wanted to cover. About this Maharal of Prague, for those that don't know who he is, he's Rabbi Judah Loew. And this is his tombstone in the Jewish cemetery of Prague. And this is a very, very, very famous place, especially for Jews. This Jewish cemetery in Prague is significant in its spiritual importance, and people flock here, much like we would to Jimi Hendrix's grave. To Maharal of Prague, you can see people are putting stones and things on it. And so in this cemetery, there's Brandeis after Brandeis after Brandeis buried on top of each other because it's so small. This is how they had to do it. They just kept burying generations on top of each other underneath tombstones, and they would try to fit them in where they could. So here's an image of the Maharal. You can see conjuring, it looks like, up the idea of Golem, and that says the truth on there, on his forehead.
That looks quite a bit like King formerly known as Prince Charles. Just
Yeah.
saying.
Sure.
Oh my God.
Looks kind of like an angry Brandeis too.
Yeah.
So
it
that
does.
is. So this is really the milieu, if I can use that word, that all of this comes out of, this spiritual melting pot of science and occultism and sorcery, necromancy, speaking to the dead. They invoked every way that they could. So it's very reminiscent of later day Macy conferences. And so when we say that the Brandeises are involved there, they are deeply involved. And we can make a connection from Louis Brandeis in 1856, born in 1856, Louisville, Kentucky, to the Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, because it's a Rabbi Moses Simon Brandeis that marries one of his 8 daughters. So this is pretty profound in that we're actually making real connections between the first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court justice, who then starts through social reform, imposing progressive measures into society, really starting to look a lot like somebody imposing tikkun olam, or this repairing of the world. And this is at the base of Jewish mysticism. So we can see where he gets it from. There's a direct line all the way to his grandfather, to his father Adolf, and then to him, from Rabbi Judah Loew, whose daughter married a Brandeis. So significant. And here's today in Prague, City Hall, just outside the new City Hall, is a statue of the Maharal of Prague. So he's a well-known, famous figure in Prague. I'm not sure how many natives of the Czech Republic and people that live in Prague really truly understand what that is, but he's there, and it's been there for a long time. So that starts in Prague. He's visiting with Rudolph II. Rudolph II is changing legislation to protect the Maharal and the Jews of Prague. We've gone through the will. And so we forward ourselves to the progressive era, because we're bringing up progress. And so what is probably the most influential history of progress but the progressive era in America? And so how does that all start? But The Promise of American Life by Herbert Crowley in 1909. This then inspires Theodore Roosevelt's Progressive Bull Moose Party. You can see, even this came as a surprise to me. Maybe it came as a surprise to you that Theodore Roosevelt was considered a progressive, but he ran on a progressive platform. It's him that sort of divided the two votes between Taft and Wilson, and allowed Wilson to win that 1912 election. And ultimately, the New Freedom Campaign is a near mirror image of the platform that Roosevelt had put forward. Okay, and then you guys are also familiar with this, although it definitely needs to be mentioned to any new viewers or listeners, that really the progressive era we mentioned earlier started through military preparedness, efficiency, and scientific governance. Well, efficiency comes from this book right here, Principles of Scientific Management, written by Frederick Winslow Taylor in 1911. We can see subtly put here on the cover is a fasces.
Yep.
So this is now what we start to see develop, is that this progress is pushing us towards a fascist regime. Okay. And
Again,
so,
right in our faces.
yep. And maybe I'll drag down my copy from the bookshelf.
This is another thing that's been driving me crazy lately about this concept of National Socialism, because the left-right paradigm breaks down in everybody's face with this concept that so libertarianism is far right, but National Socialism is also far right. Like, and everybody sort of holds on to this as somehow, like, this somehow makes sense to people. When nothing could be different from each other than libertarianism and National Socialism. And you realize that National Socialism is actually a form of socialism. I mean, you know, you realize how socialism works. It's centralization of power by government, and it's either communism, where the government owns the means of production, or it's National Socialism, where the government buys, the corporations own the means of production, and the government buys goods and services from the corporation. But it's all socialism. You can't convince people that this is true. And then, as we discussed earlier, you go back into history, and you see that the National Socialists in Germany in 1935 and the American Progressives in 1935 were basically talking the same. You know, the eugenics movement was progressive, the racism, the social Darwinism, which now they all call far right. Are you saying that the progressive movement in 1935 was super far right? Is that what you're arguing? You know, it doesn't make any sense. These people believe these nonsensical things that can't be shown through any historical context. But it's the story, it's the mythos, it's the fabrication. They believe in their minds that they'll say that National Fascism is late stage capitalism, because once there was a free market at some point, again, when, I'd like to know, because as you mentioned, Hamiltonianism defeated Jeffersonianism, which was the attempt at establishing a free market in 1790. I mean, my God. So when was this mythical free market that evolved, capitalism evolves into National Socialism? Like, what are you talking about? But they believe it to their core and they won't let it go. So,
and the truth is that it was Marxists, socialists, and American progressives that combined underneath the title of the League for Industrial Democracy, a Fabian coined term, into this fascist regime. So they're all in it together.
Yeah, I mean, people will point to the fact that communists, at least in Nazi Germany, when the National Socialists were on the rise, they hated the communists. And it's true that there were conflicts between the communists and the National Socialists over what kind of socialism, right? But that doesn't mean they're not both socialists, you know?
That's right. One's more radical. So this is a great example that you bring up, because Fabians are administrative. They're not out in the streets and setting cars on fire. They've left up to the Marxist sort of aspect of their following of socialism.
You know, I was going to say real quick. Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
The string that ties it all together and throughout all the history of what you're describing, Duane, is technocracy, right? They're all actually technocrats is what it is. And this is different forms of this idea that science is somehow this utopian scientism is what I'd call it. It's not, I mean, science is a process, but we see scientism as part of the dogma of the cult of progress, where science is going to somehow figure out what makes all of us happy. And if only we'll let the technocrats impose upon us the perfect utopia that's their science has proven will make us all happy, then we'd all be living in some kind of utopia right now. And this is, you know, this is the myth that they tell themselves. And so they think they're the good guys fighting to implement heaven on earth. And those of us who are arguing for freedom are somehow, because we live in the real world where we know that bad stuff happens and we have to, you know, life is a struggle. But freedom allows us to navigate these struggles in the most optimal fashion, according to our own sovereign will. You know, But these utopianists, they believe that we're preventing their heaven on earth, because if only we let the technocrats impose their will upon us, then the scientists, the science would show us the way to the heaven on earth. I mean, it's a mythos, it's a mythology.
And it's pushed constantly. It's pushed constantly in entertainment, again, towards everybody, that it's the way, the only way, the right way.
Right.
And we're going to get to Disney a little bit, I think, at the end. And this is a perfect little ear note for that part of the conversation later, because the world of tomorrow, right? That's the whole concept behind what Disney pushes. And
Right.
I'm going there this year. We'll see what it looks like up close and personal.
Right.
But I was thinking earlier, we don't have any award-winning theater performances called Jefferson. We have one called Hamilton that I was doing an experiment years ago where I had never seen it. I didn't bother, witnessing it or anything, but I went up to everybody I knew and asked them what they thought of it. And I got the same response. If they had seen it, I got the same response. It was this, it was breathtaking. It was perfect. It was amazing. You got to see it. It was a play about Hamilton. It was very surprising, but of course, in the way he is framed and the way his whole philosophy is framed in history, in the way we learn about him in public schools too, it's all conducive to exactly what Duane's saying.
So that's a classic example of just what we've been talking about with where Hamilton is actually an imperialist, right? I mean, he advocated for central banking, and he was working with the British East India Company. He did not want to separate the U.S. economy from the British colonial economy. And Jefferson is the classical liberal. So that play Hamilton, when it came out, it twisted. So they've had to plant these seeds that classical liberalism is actually racism or fascism. So now everybody thinks that Jefferson he was a slave owner. Hence, all people aren't created equal. Then is that what we're supposed But that's the way they push it. Well, he owned a slave, so he was a terrible person, and Hamilton was this great guy. And now all these modern liberals, these progressives, think that Hamilton, who pushed central banking, who pushed the most conservative, the most imperialistic, in terms of the post-American Revolution scene, they think of him as this great liberator because Jefferson was played by a black guy in a play. I mean,
on the subject of Jefferson, a friend of mine received a book in the mail today. It's called Jefferson. It's by Albert J. Nock, the father of American democracy. And he opened it up, and on the inside it says, "This edition is dedicated with esteem and affection to Mr. Justice Louis D. Brandeis, friend of all just men and a lover of the right."
There you go.
Capital R, right.
And so they were all Jeffersonian, right? And so what is the famous quote of Jefferson? But life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
Right. And so when we talk about classic liberalism, John Locke has to be mentioned. And what was he? Life, liberty, and property. And what is the most powerful but property, whether it's land or intellectual property or whatever? This is really what allows us to express our free will and our own agency. Right. And so you see Thomas Jefferson even watering down the message. And what is it? But he's applying Moses Dabrushka's thought of the pursuit of happiness. And Jefferson was very interested in what was going on in the French Revolution at the time.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually fascinating. The concept of property rights actually are also what give us our what I call liability constraints, right? So prior to progressivism, we had a right to protect our property. So if somebody poisoned us, we could sue them. If a corporation poisoned us, we could sue them. That's liability law based on property rights. The progressive movement changed that by diminishing property rights. And again, the progressive mythos says, well, private property is what allows billionaires to amass everything. And so we hate private property. And you're like, well, no, private property rights are what allows you to own yourself rather than be a slave. Yes. But hey, but in the end, what the progressive movement did then was transform the idea of liability constraints based on private property into this regulatory system that they all promote today, which actually allows the corporations to poison us at least a little bit until
Right.
the regulation. And then, of course, they corporately
Right.
capture the regulatory agencies, and now they can just poison us as much as they want, you know?
Yeah, and
And there's
what did they
nothing we
do
can
during the
We can't
lockdowns?
fight it
Right.
because
So
we have
what
no
did-
property rights.
What did they do during the lockdown? But the first thing they did was remove all liability of these corporations.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And
they're
nobody
trying to
really,
pass laws. I believe they may have already passed the law in the current agriculture bill in Congress, passing eliminating liability constraints on pesticide use.
right.
I mean, they're just going to allow these guys to poison all of us. They already are. And in the United States, it's literally insane how much they get away with.
And
Oh
so
yeah.
we,
Of course, you can't even grab for like organic products or the products that are like, try these instead. They're all filled with
Right.
poison too.
even using that term organic can get you into trouble. See, they framed that whole conversation. This
Right,
is why
exactly.
me on my farm, people come to me and they ask me if I grow organically. I never use that word. I just say, yeah, we don't use pesticides. We grow from the ground.
Yep.
And so, Doug, that's really what you were talking about there, like personal property. Where are we now? But you will own nothing and be happy. The WEF message,
Exactly.
right? And that's the elimination of private property, and you're going to be a happy person apparently.
And how
You also
much-
mentioned the technocracy. This is really where that book that I showed you. This is where the technocracy starts.
Yeah.
Louis Brandeis, Walter Lippmann, Herbert Crowley, Felix Frankfurter are all having meetings with Stuart Chase, Steinmetz, that little midget, and the people around Howard Scott at the Bureau for Human Audit, which was created by the founder or the owner of the House of Truth. So what was Howard Scott's first organization but the Bureau for Human Research? So there's a total transfer. They were having their first technocratic meetings at the New Republic magazine with Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter there. So you clearly see, and this is what I've laid out in my book that most people don't know yet because I haven't published it, but this is what we see, a total clear line from the publishing of that book to the technocracy movement through FDR's New Deal. And Brandeis is there. He's just as much of an influencer on FDR as he was Woodrow Wilson. He's the real organizer behind the New Deal. I'm talking too much probably. But so we see through the New Deal, the creation of the New Deal, like Stuart Chase is the author of that. Once you start to look into these people, you see that this is really the origins of the technocracy out of Columbia University, the New Republic magazine, and these American progressives.
Yeah,
So-
you'd say like the New Deal is chapter 2 to like the New Freedom.
Yes, it is exactly, and you can look at it like the two world wars are bookends or one big war with an
Right.
intermission,
Yeah.
right?
But
So
by the way, you'll notice that it's the outgrowth of the military-industrial complex. It always is. I mean, you talk about
Always.
military preparedness, but that's where, again, that's why it's an elite movement. It's the military-industrial complex that's built all of this. It comes from military philosophy and military
that's
thinking.
exactly right.
The Prussian school system is military school system. Allopathic healthcare is military healthcare.
Yep, and we're going to get into
the
the
founding fathers were so against a standing army, because once you have a standing army, then you have a permanent class of people profiting off the military, building this military-industrial complex, which will only get bigger and bigger and bigger, which it has.
and what did the founding fathers warn against but chattel slavery?
Yep.
They said under certain conditions, chattel slavery will thrive, and that's where we are in the year 2026. Is really largely under the control of a chattel slavery system that they argued about it in the Federalist Papers and all of those things, right? Many years ago.
The myth of progress is what powers it. It was what justifies it.
Right.
This whole story that the progressive tells themselves, which is why you have to allow the government or some central authority to control every aspect of your existence.
Right. And they created the nanny state, the welfare state, these same people. This is, you talk about patriarchy and all of that, but this is really, the government is now your daddy.
Yeah.
So
that's what I mean. It's all projection when they talk. They're the ones that are pushing that are against actual diversity of culture by imposing the same education system on everybody.
Right.
They're the
So-
ones who are saying fight the patriarchy while building the most powerful patriarchal system ever devised by mankind, this technocratic socialist system.
Yes.
I mean,
And that's where we are going. I've been sharing the Tech Native America map, and it's all seems to fit with Trump's rhetoric about Greenland and Panama Canal and the Gulf of America now.
right.
So, you know,
Yeah, I found it very fitting that Elon Musk and Trump were kind of almost like flirting and joking back and forth about the Greenland shit when
Right.
that was all going on social media. When you look into who was so important in the technocracy movement in Canada was, what was his name? Errol?
Joshua Haldeman.
Josh Haldeman, yeah.
That connection is
Elon
so
Musk's
crazy.
grandfather.
Elon
Yeah.
Musk's grandfather founded the technocracy movement here in Canada, Joshua Haldeman, 100%.
Didn't he get
Wonder-
kicked out as well for that?
Yes, he did, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. And also, you know, Elon Musk comes out with the chainsaw famously now, talking about efficiency of government, cutting costs of government. This is really how he was introduced to this whole conversation. And that's DOGE. And so what does DOGE stand for? But the Department of Governmental Efficiency. So when he's doing those things, he's hearkening back directly to Brandeis, because it was in the advanced rate case in 1910 that Brandeis famously said he'll save the railways millions of dollars a day. And that made headlines across America, just like Musk when he brought out the chainsaw and started talking efficiency. So it's a direct hearkening back to the origins of fascism in America and what you talked about, the military-industrial complex, right? Fascinating. And then also, we talked about utopia. Another word for utopia is the kingdom of the brotherhood. So we talked social gospel. The Christian movement also has its version of utopia, just like the progressives, just like the socialists and the Marxists. So now we get into the progressive era. And we talked about this administrative, soft socialism on one hand of the Fabians, and then sort of a fighting in the streets, creating tumult through a Marxist on the other side of it. We see that in the very creation of the Fabian Society. So when I say the progressive era, 1890 to 1920, it's because I have to include the Fabians' creation. And there was a schism between the Fellowship of the New Life, the first organization, and then the eventual founders of the Fabian Society, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw. So the American Fabian Society then in 1895 is created, the American Fabian Magazine in 1895. And where were they created but Boston?
Yeah,
The 1898 visit to America of Fabian founder Sidney and Beatrice Webb promoted industrial democracy. They published the book in 1897, and then they were on a world tour of the Dominion. I think it was called the Dominion and not the Commonwealth, but they went as far away as New Zealand to promote their book, Industrial Democracy. And they met with all of the highfalutin controllers. We're talking pre-20th century. They interviewed, and this is what it says in Beatrice Webb's diary, they interviewed Theodore Roosevelt, who was just about to become governor of New York. They interviewed Woodrow Wilson, who was still just the president at Princeton. This is 1898. Daniel Coit Gilman, who was the president of Johns Hopkins University, and where we start to see the academic infusion of Prussian education. You were talking about that earlier, Doug. Right. He's also the treasurer of Skull and Bones. And they meet with Charles W. Eliot, who's one of the key guys in bringing religions together through the divinity schools and creating the PhD system. So the PhD system itself from Prussia, these are the men that did it. And these are the people that Beatrice and Sidney Webb are meeting. Sidney lectures at Harvard, lectures at MIT. They spend a week in Boston observing the municipal mechanisms, the American way, so that they can start to manipulate and understand. And there's no mention of Brandeis, but 100% he had to have met them. There's no way that they wouldn't. And it almost speaks to Brandeis's importance to not have been mentioned in that book.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
So I say 1890 because of this Fabian influence starts before the Progressive Era. Mm-hmm. So I also include the Fabian Societies merging into the British Labour Party in 1900. So they become a legit political force, and still today. So Theodore Roosevelt assumed presidency in 1901 following the assassination of McKinley. And then Emmeline Pankhurst's suffragette movement in 1903. Now, Emmeline Pankhurst is one of these Fabian members from the schism that left. But what is she? But she's out in the streets really creating tumult. So I think that, the ethical socialists of this split, the less radical that the mainstream call, they're actually the more radical. They're the ones pushing Marxists' agenda to create this dialectic problem reaction to the solution of administrative law that these Fabians are putting in. Okay.
Well, and then ultimately that speaks to the fact that so much of this is driven by the elites, and then the elites are constantly using controlled opposition. These are controlled opposition systems that have been developed literally over centuries, so that the elite class can manage. It's how they manage what I call the colonized class or the colonized masses. Right. It's not a working class like in a socialist sense, but yes, we do live where there's an imperial class and then there's the rest of us. I think actually that's part of the pernicious nature of the myth of progressivism, is that it takes the responsibility for the oppression that we all live under. We do live under oppression, but they've managed to place the blame on capitalism, which is just a natural historical part of this larger dialectic. Instead of, no, we're oppressed by imperialists who are these criminals, right? And this is what I would call populist history. Populist history examines history from the perspective of an ethic and then a criminal class, where these criminals take our personal sovereignty. And that's the problem that we're actually facing, which is why, and the reason why I bring this up now is because, as you were talking about those early days, 1900, the populist movement in the United States was very, very powerful. And it was starting to take over. And I think that the big impetus for the push for progressivism in the United States by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation and all of that was really in response to this populist movement, to make sure that the people didn't regain control of the power structure, because they were getting actually quite close. In the late 19th century, there was William Jennings Bryant, the classic Cross of Gold speech that he made. The populist movement was starting to take control over the Democratic Party and became very close. This guy, William Jennings Bryant, almost ran for president. And they had to finagle behind the scenes to make sure that he didn't, to try to keep the populist movement at bay. And I think there's direct parallels between that time period and this time period, because with the internet, all of this populist history became available again. Of course, the first thing the progressive movement did in 1910, 1920 was take over the education system, eliminate all the populist history, and replace it with this progressive mythos. Yeah.
That's also the time that J.P. Morgan took over the newspapers in that sort of same area.
Controlling all the information outlets. And they really had control over it up until the internet suddenly liberated us again. I mean, there were a few old school populist books now called conspiracy theory, published in the 40s. I mean, the tradition continued, but it was all, tainted as conspiracy theory, and none of it was taught in any of the academic circles, of course. So, most people just wrote it off as amateurish, even though it was the actual real history. I mean, people still do that. They say, oh, you don't have a PhD, you're not an expert, which is the technocratic line, which is the progressive mythology again showing up and saying you're not an expert, therefore who cares about your primary sources? I'm not even going to look at your argument or care about the quality of your logic. I'm just going to blow you off completely because I only listen to the Washington Post and the New York Times.
And what is that but an appeal to authority?
Oh yeah, they've created their own superheroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you mentioned laissez-faire, and we've mentioned the family unit as important targets for these guys. Well, the U.S. Constitution, right? Classic liberalism also falls under the same title. Christianity ultimately was the number one first sort of mooring that they had noticed that we attached ourselves to that gave us strength that they attacked. I mean, this is really science versus God. This is ultimately where it all comes from. But they attacked the Constitution, classical liberalism, family, laissez-faire, free market, all of these ways that we actually empower ourselves. And you can see in the year 2026, they're all kind of pejoratives now. People speak negatively of capitalism. Actually, they don't ever say laissez-faire, do they? They just say capitalism.
It's as if the definition has changed in the last 30 years. When you say capitalism, you're no longer arguing for free markets. I constantly, when I'm online or, again, talking to my progressive neighbor, because the progressive mythos now says that the word capitalism basically means fascism, and late stage capitalism is fascism, or what the story that they tell themselves. So I've stopped using the term. I consider the term capitalism itself like a pointless Marxist term that's really been overly twisted by these linguistic models, so that it has no meaning. I always say I'm arguing for a free market. I never talk about capitalism anymore.
Right, that's great. That's a great lesson.
They won't accept my definitions. I mean, that's the other thing about the progressive. When you're even just trying to sit them down and say, what is the definition of terms so we can have a conversation? And I say, here's how I define fascism. Here's how I define capitalism. Here's how, oh no, I have to define them within the context of their historical ideology, which is this dialectic historical paradigm. And it's like, but I don't use the dialectic paradigm. I'm a populist. I just interpret history based on ethics, and I see criminal behavior or unethical behavior as people who are controlling, and I see, liberators who believe in freedom fighting against controlling people. And that's how I interpret history. I don't use your dialectic, And so I can't even define a term when I'm having a conversation.
Right. And so we talk about the inversion of liberalism. Well, this happened at this House of Truth. So you should be looking at the political salon that saved liberalism, how the House of Truth spurred a wave of progressive breakthroughs and what today's Democrats can learn from it. And so this is what you're talking about. The flipping of the definition of liberalism happened at this political salon. And this is where Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter both lived, along with members of the Anglo-American establishment. And Louis Brandeis and Oliver Wendell Holmes were like honored guests there often. So you can see. And this is also where they established Mount Rushmore. What's his name? The sculptor. He's a Progressive Party super friend of Theodore Roosevelt. And it's there that he designs the Mount Rushmore.
And you would say that Brandeis's inclusion here is he kind of infiltrated, did he not?
Well, he definitely infiltrated the Brahmin Society of Boston to gain some credibility. And because most people, and you can look to his 1916 confirmation nomination, took almost 6 months or something because it was so contested. That I'm not sure how much people knew of Brandeis, whether they knew his Frankist background or not, but they knew that he was a radical and that he had no place as a Supreme Court justice where they're supposed to not be involved politically. They're supposed to just cast their opinion, right?
And I know that you and I were talking about the Boston Brahmins the other night, and I was suggesting that that's a really interesting name because, I mean, are they directly are they taking that name as a liberty for calling themselves the upper caste of society? And we're not even talking about government officials here. We're talking about these kinds of pushers and movers of philosophical ideas, and they're calling themselves the highest class in America, basically. And it's interesting. I don't know if that ties to anything nefarious or not, but I did look it up, and it is a direct take. It was borrowed right from the Hindu caste system. It was used metaphorically to suggest a hereditary intellectual and social elite.
And who's credited? Who's credited, Andy? Does it say a name there?
Oh, of course. Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., the dad.
Yes, senior, yes.
Okay. So you can see that they've just created this world for themselves. So
it's the future perfect.
It is. And so I'm going to keep going here. We're actually doing pretty good. And we're going to get into some pretty extraordinary history. But first, I just got to define the progressive era. We're going to move through the progressive era into the 30s and FDR here in a moment. But the reason why I include everything in that progressive era up until 1920, here's why. We stopped at Theodore Roosevelt's assumed presidency, Emmeline Pankhurst's suffragette movement in Britain in 1903, Herbert Crowley's The Promise of American Life in 1909, Frederick Winslow Taylor's Shop Management in 1905, and then his Principles of Scientific Management in 1911. The first presidential platform that was progressive is the Bull Moose Party, as we've discussed, 1912. The election of progressive Democrat Woodrow Wilson and the New Freedom Campaign in 1912, that same election, basically a mirror of Theodore Roosevelt's progressive platform. The establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the Federal Trade Commission in 1914, the founding of the new republic in that same year, the confirmation of Louis Brandeis as U.S. Supreme Court Justice in 1916, Woodrow Wilson's second term beginning in 1916, on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." 4 months later, he's declaring war on Germany. So we have the American suffragette preparedness efficiency movements of 1916-17, inspired by declaration of and mobilization of war by the Americans, to the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations, and the founding of Israel at the Paris Peace Conference. Brandeis is right there. And
Hey, Duane, can you share your screen again? I'm not seeing it.
I'm not sharing anything. I'm just reading.
Okay.
Right now. I am
Fair enough.
going to share here in a second, but
All right.
Brandeis shows up in Paris at the Paris Peace Conference the very same day the Treaty of Versailles is finally signed. So were they waiting for this guy to confirm that everything was right? I would say so, because they had to wait for him to sign the Balfour Declaration and have final say. The regime, the Brandeis regime, famously had final say in the text that was written in the founding document of Israel. So that lends me to think that, yeah, they were waiting for Brandeis. He had to wait for the Supreme Court season to end. And as soon as he could, he jumped on a boat and came to Paris. And when he arrived, the same day, they signed the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so the efficiency and preparedness movements, this is the origins of the modern military-industrial complex, like 40 years before Eisenhower warned us.
Right.
So it had already infiltrated and fully substantiated into American life to a point where it was institutional. And then Eisenhower comes along and warns us of it. And what does he warn us of? Not just a military-industrial complex, but a technological scientific elite. That is the part of that speech that I really focused on, because that is what really took over.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we get to the World's Fairs, because this is how they really spread the idea of progress and internationalism throughout the world. And so the first one we're going to start with is the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. And this is where Mussolini's leader of the Black Shirts, Italo Balbo, visits America. Balbo receives a hero's welcome as the first to guide a large armament of planes in formation across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to show you what that looks like, because there is video of it. But it's not the easiest thing to find. But there's a couple of videos here showing his reception in the United States. So this is a leader of the Black Shirts, remind you. Okay? And organized by Mussolini at this time. There's no real transatlantic flights happening. I mean, they are, but this is really at the burgeoning moments of human aeronautics, right? And so I'll just let this play. You guys can hear that?
A little bit. You can turn it up.
On to Chicago, their goal. The end of a 6,100-mile journey from Orbitello. The Air Armada formed a beautiful picture as it soared over the World's Fair, with all Chicago cheering the visitors. A welcome that climaxed them all was given to General Balbo and his men. And amid the shrieks of sirens, the roars of acclaim, the ships landed and taxied to their moorings inside the breakwater. General Balbo received the tribute of a conquering hero, a modern master of the sky, who replied to the shouts of Viva Balbo with the exclamation of real friendship. Viva Chicago! Viva gli Stati Uniti d'America!
Okay, so you see the Indians playing a role here. And so that's when he arrived in Chicago. Now there is a statue called the Balboa Monument. It still stands in Chicago. I'm pretty sure you guys all know that. But for your viewers and listeners, that Mussolini donated a 2,000-year-old column as a commemorating moment when Italo Balbo flew across from Italy to the United States. It still stands in Chicago today, just outside of Soldiers Field. So then he goes to New York on his way home. So he goes to Chicago. He lands in a few places, but the last place he lands is in New York. And he gets a ticker tape parade, believe it or not.
Hundreds of thousands lined the streets as New York gave Italo Balbo and his staff a roaring welcome. Parading up the Grand Canyon of skyscrapers in traditional style, the Italian flyers were met with a hail of ticker tape, a fitting tribute to the daring airmen from across the sea.
That's it? Okay. So it showed him at the ticker tape parade. Shows him landing in Chicago. He visits a couple other places. He receives a Medal of Honor from FDR. It's actually passed through Congress. He receives a Medal of Honor for that feat. Same with his second in command. He has lunch with FDR at the White House. So you can see the definition of liberalism and all these other words. Fascism has certainly changed too over time. Okay, so you guys hear me? Oh, I can't hear you guys.
Yeah, we can hear you.
There we go. I can hear you, Nick. I can't hear you, Andy.
Andy's muted.
Oh, Andy's muted.
Oh, of course, that's what it is.
Okay, cool.
That's always the case.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people really understand the relationship between progressivism and fascism in the 1930s and how they were joined at the hip. It's only
Hey, Doug, can you get a little closer? Can you get closer to your mic? I think we can't really hear you. There you go.
I was just going to say, I don't think people really understand the close relationship between progressivism and fascism in the 1930s in the United States, because we are raised in this post-World War II era where you're just bombarded with anti-fascist propaganda from the war.
Yeah.
And so, of
almost
course,
impossible
the
to break
Nazis
through.
and the fascists are the worst people that ever lived. I mean,
Mhm.
but it was essentially there was no difference between the American progressive and the National Socialists in 1935. I mean, that's
Exactly.
where Hitler was Times Man of the Year twice during that time period.
Right.
They loved it. They loved him. This movement represented everything the progressive movement was pushing for here in the United States. And in California, the eugenics programs, I mean, the people that were implementing the eugenics program in California went to Germany to help them establish their eugenics program. I mean, this stuff was just commonplace here in the U.S. People pretend these people were the most evil people ever, and nothing like that could ever happen here, and certainly not a progressive person.
Yeah, we mentioned it. Yeah, we mentioned it before too, that Goebbels learned propaganda from Edward Bernays, an American. He's the father of propaganda. He literally wrote the book on it years before Goebbels, and the Nazis admitted that they used that book to influence their people.
I think this really boils down to the heart of the issue is this. I mean, talking about propaganda, because in the progressive movement, again, that like to me, again, as a person that applies ethics to history, propaganda is unethical. The progressive doesn't care about human sovereignty. The human is a cog in a larger machine.
Right.
And the
Right.
machine is what's important to the progressive. And this is the problem, because, you know, it's funny. I was having this sort of argument online with somebody else. These people want to believe that the system exists, or the government exists, or the community exists. And so we have to pass these laws for the good of the community or the good of the system. It's like there is no system. There's only us. There's only people. The system is just groups of people working together. But when you start to prioritize the group over the individual, it's just an excuse by some individuals to control other individuals. That's all it is. Right? They're manufacturing this idea, this system, and we have to do this for the good of the system. But you're really just creating a justification for your own power. Like you talked about, Duane, narcissism. It's a narcissistic urge. You think your ideas are better than everybody else's. This is the expert. I have a PhD, so my idea is better than yours. The appeal to authority fallacy, which is their whole shtick, is all an appeal to authority fallacy, which you think sounds, you know, almost silly. But then you look at what just happened to all of us in COVID, which was one big appeal to authority fallacy, and like 90% of everybody just fell for it. It's amazing how powerful it is. So
Yeah, the public becomes the flying monkeys that surround the narcissist.
Exactly.
And so I would say that the defining pattern there is that all of these people are out of control. They're not in control of themselves. So when they are given the ability to control others, you can see that it really comes out of them. This is what I see even in my personal life with, you know, these.
They don't want to be in control either, is from what I mean, it sounds cliche, but they just want to be hooked up and sterilized and entertained and satiated. And I know that that's more of a generalization than really an observation of how individuals feel. But you collectively look at their behaviors and it kind of comes out that way. Wall-E, the movie, may be an extreme. Idiocracy, not so much, but still an extreme. It's the allegory. That's what's important, that people seem to just, well, that's not us. It's completely, that's a dystopia that's not real. That's they even, despite the influence that entertainment has on them, they reject the ones that are actually trying to tell them something.
Right.
They'll be like walking along, watching their iPad, drinking a Slurpee, and they're watching Wall-E and going, that'll never happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Or they'll justify it, right? The famous, well, because, you know.
They'll say, well, they wouldn't let that happen. They wouldn't.
Exactly.
Relinquish
control.
They're doing it. They're like, who is this they?
Right.
Tell us who they are.
It's infancy. It's eternal infancy. And it's another observation that I've seen is that, we were all liberal at one point, but no adults listened to us. Now it seems, and we know that this is intentional. We know it's not that suddenly the adult class suddenly realized, oh, the youth have something right to. No, it's clearly an intentional propping up, just as they shield themselves behind vulnerable groups in all social circumstances. They clearly do that with the youth in general. The youth is the best weapon they have ever had.
Right.
Yep.
And so, of course, is our fear.
Yeah, Beatrice Webb says that in her own work, that the university students are their greatest weapon.
Yeah, Orwell said it too.
It's
And then the
interesting in
Fabians went on to
Prussian
do the
system where the student is isolated only among people of their own age group. Like actually in traditional schooling, right, you've got a whole school, or if you think about a martial arts school where the senior students are teaching the younger student, like they're always like mixed and working with each other and working together. And then in the Prussian system comes along and suddenly it's all really delineated. And that way they could change what they're teaching to a 10-year-old and what they're teaching to a 5-year-old could be totally different. They can, you know, each in a 4-year period, right? They completely control what that generation of kids is going to be thinking and feeling. And they can switch it up and tweak it. They have total control because they've isolated each generation of kids. And this is another example of how, well, I think they do promote the rebelliousness of each generation of kids. I mean, how else could they inculcate this trans thing, you know, into a whole generation of kids when you're like, wait a minute, where did this come from? It felt to most of us like it came out of left field somewhere. And all of a sudden now all the kids are into this and it's the new thing for them. And 70% of them think that they're transgender. And you're like, what? And it's just because they were able to slip it into the school system at a time and none of us knew, because we went to school a long time ago. We're not in that scene. We're not in. And even the people that were in college when they started to slip it into the 12-year-olds and the 13-year-olds, they don't know. They have no idea that stuff's getting indoctrinated into these younger kids. And so by isolating them, each generation, they can create whatever they need to, whatever seed they're looking to seed into the culture, they'll do it through the youth.
Nick, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to say about I read a book called Fabian Freeway by Rose L. Martin, which is another excellent source. And I did the whole thing on the channel as well. It's under the playlist if anyone wants to check it out. And to talk about the continuity, in that book, she describes how the English Fabian socialists spread across the pond and set up organizations such as the ISS, the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, talking about harnessing this energy of the youth. Don't you want the world to be better? Don't you see that things are unjust?
Yeah.
And it's appealing to that natural sense of, we got to fix this. We got to make it better for people. Look, we need to improve things, which everybody wants to see justice. Everybody wants to see people doing well and getting on. But they capture it and then they steer it and they control it. And what was interesting was how the ISS, when the USSR was starting to turn sour and the news was getting out about what was going on there, they were like, we need to separate ourselves a little bit from this socialism, communism thing. And they rebranded as the League for Industrial Democracy, the LID, the lid. And I always think of it as like the lid on the jar of the, those little creatures that they train, the flea circus, right? They train them by putting them in a jar with a lid. And then eventually they learn to not jump higher because they can't get any higher. And then you take the lid off and then you've got these performing little fleas that never leave the circus. And that's what I always think of it as. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. It's another thread to pull on for anybody out there, the Fabian socialism, moving over to the States, and then the ISS becoming the League for Industrial Democracy, which itself also received a lot of funding by the philanthropic foundations, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford. And that's detailed in Worms's book here. So also key parts of the puzzle that I want people to be aware of.
Great resources.
And that turns into the Students for the League of Industrial Democracy, which becomes the New Left of the 60s, which then now becomes our modern liberal activism that we see today in Minneapolis, whatever. It's a direct thread all the way through. Nice. And the ISS starts as the American Fabian League in Boston. So a couple things I want to mention here before I keep going, because we're just about at Disney. The Committee on Public Information is the first propaganda division in the United States, developed in 1917 in the preparation mobilization for war. And who's there but Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. This is really where Tavistock comes from too. And then we talk about the education system and free will today. Well, Johann Gottlieb Fichte is the founder of our modern day Western education system. He's a Prussian educator along with Humboldt. And in his book, Addresses to German Nation, he says that they must remove the free will of the student in the soil before it sprouts. That's literally what he said.
I remember you sharing that quote. I can't believe they were able to write this stuff and it be taken as gospel basically by the entire class.
Yep. And then at the end, we're going to show you that this pride flag, you were talking about LGBTQ. Well, the new flag is called the Progress Pride Flag. Okay.
What?
Walter Lippmann is a founder of the ISS, along with the other Upton Sinclair. Clarence Darrow was the first real socialist. A couple other guys, but they're all friends with Brandeis. They actually all work with Brandeis. Morris Hillquit, he's like on the arbitration board of the Protocols of Peace with Brandeis. And so Italo Balbo is considered the modern Christopher Columbus when he flew over. That's what they called him. And then, so one other thing here of the 1933 Chicago Fair is that they had a Jewish day. So there was many days, like ethnical days that they had, because this is an international movement. It's a melting pot, right? They're going to have days for each ethnic grouping. And on July 3rd, 1933, they had Jewish Day. And it was called, they held this thing at Soldiers Field. That place can hold up to 100,000 people. So there was at least 100,000 people there. And they put together this Romance of the People presentation. There's 3,000 or 4,000 actors, dancers, and singers that are involved. And I'm going to just play it now. Not sure if there's sound. There's Soldiers Field. There's a Star of David on the ground. You can see the place is packed. And they pull out this Moloch 27-foot statue, resembling the one at Bohemian Grove, by the way.
So funny. Once again, if you ask Google or Chat GPT or anything like that, if Moloch has any cultural connection to Judaism or anything, it rejects it outright,
Right.
of course.
Well,
Which
here's proof against that.
this is very strange.
Yeah, and so after the lights go down, they actually perform a child sacrifice. Now, this is admitted. There's nothing controversial about any of this.
The mock sacrifice.
Yeah. Okay. So very similar to the Bohemian Grove. And when you look at the origins of the Bohemian Grove, what is that word? Bohemia, but that's where Brandeis comes from. And, truth be told, they established even Greenwich Village as a sort of headquarters for Bohemianism, like hedonistic interests, right? So further degradation of the society. And so that will actually make sense here. By the time we get to the end of this, you'll see that plays an important role. This idea of Jewish mystic, tikkun olam, repairing the world, is really what's behind that as well. So then I'm going to attempt to share something here. I'll try again. We'll get back to this pictures.
I'll just say while you're looking for that as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned about Walter Lippmann there and his involvement in the founding of ISS.
Mm-hmm.
So I just got my copy of Walter Lippmann and the American Century through.
Oh, nice.
On your recommendation. I got
Yeah.
a nice beat up old acceptable. They grade the quality of the books. This was acceptable, so it's much cheaper, but you can still read it. And yeah, check the index and it's in there. Intercollegiate Socialist Society, I think 8 or 9 references throughout the book. So
yeah.
Checks
Well,
out.
he's a founding father of it. Now, some people might argue that, but it's his involvement with the American Fabian League, his membership as an American Fabian, that puts him there. Most people will say Upton Sinclair and Clarence Darrow and the other guy, but Walter Lippmann is very much there. He's and you look into the ISS literature, it shows how he is going from college campus to college campus to college campus preaching this stuff. So.
There was a sentence in the prologue that I quickly glanced through that really stood out to me. And it says, Lippmann commanded a loyal and powerful constituency, some 10 million of the most politically active and articulate people in America. And then it says, many of these people literally did not know what they ought to think about the issues of the day until they read what Walter Lippmann had said.
Yeah. And
they didn't know what to think. Somebody needs to tell me what to think.
Yeah, right. And back in the day, that's what people would say. What did Walter say today, honey? Same with Walter Cronkite, generation later. So you can see that the expert really controls, like Edward Bernays says, forms people's tastes and their interests.
Oh, absolutely. And they don't think for themselves at all anymore because they can rely on the expert. And again, like we were saying earlier, that there's no real discussion about, defining terms with some of these people. And it's because no matter what you say, you're not the expert. So therefore they won't, but they would have to check with their experts.
Right.
And they won't because they know you're talking against it in some form.
Yeah. For some reason I can't share.
There you go.
Oh, there it is. Sweet. So straight out of La Follette's, this is the origins of the Progressive Party. So you can see it's February 4th, 1913. Robert La Follette is super famous as a progressive. most people will identify him as one of the founders. And it's because of his La Follette's Weekly magazine. And in this edition, he actually shows the origins of it. It's really pronouncing the origins of the Progressive Era. And what is it at first but the National Progressive Republican League? You can see Robert La Follette, Beveridge, some names there. But then on the next page, we see our friend Louis Brandeis being named as a founder of the Progressive Era right here, and as part of the Republican Progressive League. So this is further evidence that it infiltrated both parties. This is really what happened in 1912, is that they infiltrated both the Republican conservative side and the Democratic left. And so here we are in the year 2026 and nothing's really changed, okay? So they look to Woodrow Wilson as a godhead figure. This is what Edward Bernays says that they had to do, is to create Woodrow Wilson into a godhead figure so that he would be the leading expert that would influence everybody. And so busting the trusts was a key progressive tenet. This is where Brandeis gets involved in creating and coining the term regulated competition. So in his new Freedom, which he didn't write, of which Brandeis introduced him to in 1912, just a few months before the election. And see, he talks about what is progress, but like looking through the looking glass in Alice in Wonderland, that no matter how fast you run, you still end up in the same place. As a parable of progress.
Well said.
He says that he's therefore forced to be a progressive, if for no other reason, because we have not kept up with our changes of conditions. So this is where they start to imply that society is a living model and it's always moving and changing. So we must then infuse sociological jurisprudence as a new law, new form of arguing law, into a living, changing thing. And so this is antinomian against the U.S. Constitution, the tradition of the classic liberals. You can see that Woodrow Wilson's talking about it in his book about what is progress. Progress, did you ever reflect that that word is almost a new one? No word comes more often or more naturally to the lips of modern man, as if the thing it stands for were almost synonymous with life itself, and yet men through many thousand years never talked or thought of progress. So this is a new invention, this idea of progress, and most people today would say, you'll never stop progress, it's just a natural part of life. Well, it, like peer review and all of these other things, are more modern than you think, and it's actually a man-made concept. And this is why we call it the myth of human progress. So if anybody's doubting me that Woodrow Wilson was a progressive, here's one of the pins. Death of the GOP. And so here's a sort of generalized concept of what progress means to America, but manifest destiny. Trump has actually used that term. He's apparently the first president to ever actually say it in an inaugural address, and he has since mentioned manifest destiny, as well as the Monroe Doctrine, which all fits in place with the creation of the technate. Okay, Wilson with preparedness, prosperity, peace with honor. That's his second term. Here he is marching in the preparedness parade. This is all legit. This really happened. And you can see in a lot of these progressive magazines like McClure's, Collier's, La Follette's. It doesn't take long going through those, and you find all kinds of examples of progress. So we get to the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, and this is really where they ultimately imposed progressivism on an international scale. So Brandeis and his boys start at the municipal level in Boston. They start changing municipal law, then with the intent of going to county law, and then state law, then federal law, and then international law, and here we are. So a little over 10 years, probably 15 years before or after they'd started this movement in Boston, here they are putting the final touches on, DeBruska's Universal Constitution. And in the background, we see key inquiry members, the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations, the League of Nations. These are the founders of the United Nations 30 years later. Here we have John Foster Dulles, the young John Foster Dulles. Looks like he's got his hand on the most central figure here, Joseph Grew, through which all of the communication went through. We have the lone wolf of Wall Street, Bernard Baruch, who is also the chairman of the War Industries Board when the military industrial complex first gets created. Okay, so it's more economic. We've got two representatives of JP Morgan here, both, especially this one, Thomas W. Lamont, known then and now as an American fascist. So we were told that they went to Paris to make the world safe for democracy, but we have U.S. intelligence, U.S. military industrial complex figures, founders of the NSA,
Yeah, well, everyone always asks us, like, who is the they? Who is they?
Here they are.
This is they.
I identify this as the crime scene for the classic liberal. This is the day the classic liberal died. This is the Eagle Room inside the Versailles Palace. And this is where I say the ultimate crime scene is, right here.
Where's this picture from? Is this in a book or is it just
This
a
is from
standalone artifact?
No, I've gone on to official archives. I think National Archives, you can find these. I've got them, my dates and numbers here beside me because I haven't finished. But you start, I think it's the National Archives. You can see the number up here, 111-SC-61179.
Yeah.
You start putting those into that archive and you start coming up with all of these amazing pictures. So any of you viewers and listeners wanting to get into that, and I've had people ask me for those numbers and they've gone and looked and found amazing things. So you can see it's an actual folder. It's an official Signal Corp information that was created then, all stamped with little personal notes even written on it. So this is about as official a document as you can get. And it's probably the clearest one you'll ever see. Here is James T. Shotwell, Canadian Quaker, Columbia University history professor, but he's there as a librarian and historian, and he's working directly with Elihu Root at the Carnegie Endowment. So these guys are all, many of these men are on the payroll of Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford. And you go to my videos, I show all of the companies that they're associated with.
And Shotwell as well. He did the book at the Paris Peace Conference, which you tipped me off to, and I actually found a copy online. Macmillan, another one full of pictures and names detailing what happened, written by someone who was there, right? So that's a primary source. And I'm so grateful to you for tipping me off to that one, and just grateful to the universe that I was able to get my hands on it.
Dude, I can't believe you have an actual physical copy. That's awesome. And it's good timing because that's exactly where I went. It's chapter 5, Social Justice and the Peace Treaties. This is James T. Shotwell's book on it. Some people call it his memoirs of the Paris Peace Conference, in which he admits that all of this is done on Rothschild-owned land with Rothschild's consent, okay? And it's all done under the idea of social justice. So he says, but the International Labor Organization, which he is primarily known for as the founder of, these guys all sort of cohabitate around human labor, dealing as it does with the homely problems of the welfare of the common man, has a universal constituency and a lasting cause to serve. And what is that? A little further down the page, he says there was a hint of this broader conception of the purpose and scope of the International Labor Organization in the preamble to its constitution, in the statement that universal peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice. It must be confessed, however, that when we wrote these words into the text, we were not thinking of their far reach, but of a formula which would enable us to tie our institution into the structure of that new world order, which the League of Nations symbolized. So I
didn't know he'd used it. I didn't know he'd used the phrase "New World Order" in his book.
I think he has it twice there. And then he uses New World Structure. He talks about super states, and much like the founding fathers of the Constitution talked about the possibilities of chattel slavery, James T. Shotwell in this book talks about the possibilities that they are actually accidentally creating a super state.
Oops.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So from the same place, here's the inquiry, Paris Peace Conference, just to show you guys. I mean, if you've looked at my work, you've seen these guys lots, but here's the official provenance showing you that these are the actual guys. I've even gone so far as to officially locate this inside the Hotel Crillon. And these are social scientists, all of them. This is why they were recruited. It was because they were social and political scientists. So we again refer you back to the founder of social science, Moses Dabrushka, and what was he all about? But the Universal Constitution. Well, here they are, years and years later, the authors of it. Again, checkerboard floor there, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
So, Century of Progress in Chicago, 1933. Actual photos of the Armada coming in. So this is like the first time anybody's ever really seen planes in a formation at all overhead. So you can imagine how amazing that must have been and why hundreds of thousands of people showed up. So inside these expositions, it's not like you're going on a carousel or you're going there to ride, rides at a fair. You're going to see the advancements of industry. Here's an example. The Bearing Company has its own little display to show you sort of the modern advancements of bearings. So this is the flight of Italo Balbo and his Armada making several stops. Here's a panoramic of the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. Highly detailed. You can zoom right in. See it all. Okay. Star of David. This must have been Jewish Day, but you can see people are forming the Star of David.
These pictures are incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Correction, the Star of Remphan.
Star of Remphan, exactly. And so you can see that this is all legit. I've just been taking, look at Century of Progress, 1833 to 1933. I think that was when Chicago was formed, 1833. And then we have this poster with a female on it, resembling the Shekinah, female energy, standing on top of the world.
She looks like the chick from Metropolis.
Right. And what is that but the creation of Shekinah too?
Well, this is
female
like we're in
energy.
the midst of second wave feminism.
Yeah.
It's perfect symbolism for it.
Sure. This is the origins
glorious
of the energy.
item.
Yep, exactly. CIA.
Yeah, literally CIA card carrying.
Yep. Okay, Chicago's World Fair, Century of Progress. And so a little background on Richard Washburn Child. He's one of the founders of this Progressive Republican League in Massachusetts, forerunner of the Progressive Party. Harvard Law. Was writing material for Warren G. Harding. Child is the ambassador of Italy during Mussolini's reign. He helped establish and promote and drive Mussolini on his March of Rome. J.P. Morgan funded Mussolini. This is all well documented in the books that they write, but you can see that mainstream hides all of this from us as well. He actually coined, or he helped ghostwrite Mussolini's autobiography and possibly even the Doctrine of Fascism, his famous book. You can see Thomas W. Lamont, the guy that I showed in that picture at the Paris Peace Conference here. Most influential American promoters of Italian fascism until his death in 1935. He wrote the preface for my autobiography, but I would argue that he basically wrote the whole thing. Here's a picture of him. Doesn't look very threatening. Looks like a nice guy. None of them do, exactly. This is why those that enslave us, covet men like this, because they're very presentable. These are exactly who they're looking for. The liberal arts background, master of liberal arts. They infuse them with that education, and they identify them early on in the education system, really, which is a filter system. It's not here to educate any of us really beyond the operating of tools and machinery. So the Century of Progress, there's a ticket. I guess the President of the United States was there. And then FDR actually imposes the Works Progress Administration Project. Brandeis is there. Like we said, FDR calls Brandeis Isaiah. So then we jump forward to the 1939 New York World's Fair. And I'm just going to leave it on this picture for a moment. And I got to take a 2-minute break. You guys can talk amongst yourselves, please.
I'm actually going to take advantage of that break too. So audience, everybody, Just going to take like 1-2 minutes. I'll be right back.
Let's do it. See you all soon.
Okay. Okay, everybody's gone. I'll wait for everybody to get back before I start again. I appreciate everybody's patience. Probably a good time for everybody to take a bathroom break or go fill your bowl of popcorn up, because we're getting to the end here. And the influence of Walt Disney and sort of the continuation of progress into the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and how the international order is really formed by these World's Fairs. You can see that what are they introducing but the latest technological advancements, scientific achievement, industry.
And they still have these fairs from time to time. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. They still do. Really, it's like the international model almost is established now, institutionalized, Nick. So you can see that maybe they don't do it as much as they did, but certainly there are World's Fairs every year, as far as I can tell.
The word itself as well, internationalism. You know, if you break it up, you've got inter, but it also has that meaning of inter, you know, to bury something in a coffin or a crypt. Right. And then, so if you look at it as internationalism, like we're burying nationalism, that's gone. Right. Don't, you know, only fools believe in that now. I mean, Zbigniew Brzezinski in Between Two Ages in 1970 tells you that nationalism is basically defunct at this point, but they still have you voting and cheering for your flag and getting involved in that sort of stuff. Yet they're telling you they don't really exist anymore, the countries. Yeah, I would say that the first thing that they wanted to do was remove the monarchies. And you can see that the First World War, that's exactly what they did. And then, but that was with the intent of eventually removing the nation state even, or to have them at least under at least a sort of a face, right? Like maybe they took out the insides of your nation, but you still label it a nation, yet they are international, right? This is a relationship between all of the world's nations underneath this guise of universal constitution, internationalism, cosmopolitanism. I remember doing for one of my intros, I just was looking up how many countries are there. And I checked on 3 or else 4 search engines, and mostly the search engines say there are 190 whatever countries in the UN. And I was like, that's not the question I asked. Right. But the automatic answer they give you is this is how many are in the UN, and it's basically all of them at this point. Right. And how many of those countries allow immigrants to come and go as they please illegally? None. And so this is another one of those liberal arguments where they're saying, you know, let's remove borders, and who promoted that but Marx? So you can see that these are real true Marxists out in the streets of Minneapolis creating all kinds of foment and all of these. I think that they're fake deaths of these liberal progressive protesters being shot by ICE just to sort of continue to canalize and to foment everything. So I want to share something, Andy. You're muted, dude.
Yes, sir.
That was my best Jay Dyer impression. Somebody in the chat said, you know, Jay Dyer always says, unmute, dude, or something like that.
Unmute,
But
dude.
my voice is just nowhere near deep and gravelly enough.
Okay, so 1939 New York World's Fair. We can see that they presented this thing as like the viewpoint from the onlookers is observatory, sort of outside themselves, and they're looking
Like
at
Truman Show, isn't it?
future modern world, right? It's just bizarre.
Well, and look
Very
at how accurate
archonish, very Watcher like.
Yes, yes. Very Big Brother. And this is what Jacob Frank says about the key aspects of Frankism. Is that it's the trinity of Frankism. So see it there. Some images. This is Shell Oil City of Tomorrow model. Shell Oil.
right.
So any doubting that this is a top-down creation, this is a life-size street intersection so people could actually walk through it and feel what the future would be like.
They massively underestimated the number of like high-rise buildings they were going to
Right.
put up.
Right. Well, you can see that this comes out of Disney's creation at Epcot too, Progress City. We'll get to that in moments. And as a matter of fact, right now, because this is where Disney's created, 1964, New York's World Fair. And you can see the signs of internationalism all pointing to a globe. People got to walk down this promenade, and they're being deeply influenced by the idea of internationalism. So here is It's a Small World. This is the first real public display of Walt Disney, I suppose.
I've got the
And it
jingle
is-
in my head already.
Right. It's
Oh,
brought
yeah.
to you by Pepsi Cola.
I'm gonna have to see all the updated version and what it has to offer this January.
Right.
Take my
And just so you know, It's a Small World. That song is the most played song ever because it's played back to back to back to back for I don't know how many years at Disney.
oh man.
Just like Pilgrim's Progress is the second most selling book behind the Bible. So you can see that it's legit. This is sort of the introduction to America of Walt Disney. He was sort of known prior to this doing small little television hits and things. He was a host, but then they must have found him popular or, again, like Richard Washburn-Child, just a handsome guy and somebody that they could use to influence society. And so they created Disneyland out of all of this. You can see Progress Land brought to you by General Electric. And what is it but domes? Futuristic looking city. Progress Land ticket.
It's as if this future was our only option.
Right. Exactly.
Well, that's
As
exactly
if the only
what-
artistic vision that was ever promoted,
Yep.
ever,
Yeah.
was this
Yeah.
one.
I mean,
Progress
that's what-
Land.
That's what we're talking about here is this select group, these empire builders that are literally like brainwashing the colonized masses that this is what your future is going to look like.
Yep.
And so they're socially engineering that future.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
just
we talk about-
creating the
Yep.
future where, of course, they control everything.
You talk about predictive programming. Here's sort of the nascent
Oh.
moments of all of it.
Right.
And so, so they move this after the fair, New York's Fair 64. They take 4 of these things, these attractions that they had, and bring it to Disneyland in their creation of Disneyland. One of them is this, The Great Times of Lincoln, or something close to that title, and it's an animatronic Lincoln. So when we go back to the first alchemists and this chasing of the Philosopher's Stone at Rudolph II's Habsburg court, this is one of the things that they're trying to create too. This is what the golem was. They're
It's
trying
a
to
golem,
create
yeah.
fake humans. And they're Lincolnian, right? Like so many people likened Brandeis, his looks to Lincoln. And when you look at the relationship between Lincoln and Brandeis, it's very, very profound. Just as his relationship is to Jefferson, at least the ideologies that those men carried forward. But they are They're deeply Lincolnian, all of these progressives.
Mm.
And here's how they controlled him through this little board. Here's one of the displays. So what are they promoting but a welfare state? They're promoting centralized government. And then another one of these attractions that went to Disney was the famous Carousel of Progress. And it is, again, animatronics talking about the scientific evolution, industrial advancements of the 20th century. And here's a model of it with Walt Disney. So this stage, full size, turned. And so you'd watch this stage from a certain time period, and then it would revolve around and you would have a more modern look until you had your modern day.
And you shared videos of this, right, in your presentations?
Yes. I watched you can go to my thing on Disney, and I show you all kinds of stuff, including details of how Disney employees got crushed by this thing. But they didn't really stop. And it was like such a great analogy to progress that somebody got caught when this was revolving around, died, but they didn't barely miss a beat. They didn't really miss a show. I think they shut it down for the day, and then it was up and running and spinning again the next day. So there's no brakes on progress. Literally. So Futurama, the TV series cartoon, really derives from this, the Futurama 2. So we see here a weather station below Antarctica being displayed. Choosing Antarctica for some reason.
Ooh.
Futurama is what they called it. And so this is that model of the future city, tomorrow's city. This is the building. This is, you could see in the actual pictures, they literally built this thing. It's real. And then this was what the people came to see here, the Futurama display. This is the last image they saw before they left. So a futuristic city all lit. And here's again Walt Disney with his little model that we showed you earlier of the It's a Small World attraction. So Walt Disney comes out of the 1964 New York World's Fair, and eventually they move Walt Disney down to Florida, and that's where he is directly involved with Wild Bill Donovan of the CIA in establishing the land first. And they did that all secretly because it was a large land grab, and to avoid any uprisings of the local neighbors, they did it secretly under front companies. So that's your grandpa, Walt Disney. So now we get into some, I don't think it's very controversial at all, but if you talk to anybody out there in the mainstream, you're going to see that the protocols of Zion are very controversial. But what are they? And what do people mostly say about them is that they are a forgery. Right? And so we won't go too much into this, but I do want to direct people to this. It's an absolute necessary part of this story today. And you can see, what do they say? We will create a strong centralized government. And when you read this book, it plays out exactly like what Brandeis infused into our modern society, whether that's central banking, taxation, surveillance, sedition laws, labor law, new systems of law under sociological jurisprudence, the flipping of liberalism, using liberalism as a weapon. All of these things are talked about in the protocol. And so what do they say in the protocols that is the most dangerous? Well, individual initiative. If it has a touch of genius, it can accomplish more than 1 million people among whom we have sown dissensions. So they are looking to the Goy and the Goyim, and they say that there's nobody smart enough to actually figure out what we're doing. But I think that there's 4 of us now here, and hopefully there's enough people watching and viewing and will watch this to see that this is actually how they did it. We're actually kind of drawing back the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz, as to how this was all created. So the role of liberal utopians will be definitely terminated when our government is recognized. This is the one thing, when they finally recognize their government, they don't want any foreigners involved in their government. So think of dual loyalty in America. They don't want another religion. They're going to have just the one religion. Until that time, they will do us good service. these liberals wanting a utopia, right? They're utilitarian. They're going to serve their purpose, just like the definition of anti-Semitism does. And those anti-Semites become sort of their controlled opposition and helpful to their goals. So for this reason, we will still direct thought towards different fantastic theories, which will appear to be progressive. For it was by the word progress that we have successfully turned the brains of the stupid goys. There are no brains among the goys to realize that this word is but a cover for digression from the truth, unless it is applied to material inventions, since there is but one truth and there is no room for progress. You see, they get it. Progress, being a false conception, serves to conceal the truth so that nobody may know it except ourselves, God's elect, who are its guardians. Now, I could show you another 10, 15 pages on that and just continue to blow your mind as to how that all sort of fits together. Here's a picture of the Progress Pride flag.
And just real quick for anyone, looking it up online as always, and for anyone new to this topic, for instance, and seeing, oh, the protocols are all a forgery or all made up. It's like, with this amount of detail involved in those protocols, and when you look around the world and see exactly the results that they are talking about in that text, you got to ask, who did it then? Who forged it? I don't care who it is, because the authors of this predicted the fucking future to a T.
That's actually always been my feeling about them. It's like, I don't really care who wrote it or what, because what is actually in there, considering when we know they've been around for X number of years, I mean, a long period of time, and what they say actually happened. So whoever put this together really understood, they could just literally see the future, or they were somehow involved with some organizations that were powerful enough to create the exact future that is being described in this book. I mean,
well said.
You describe the writing of it to, or what you want to get out of it, at least you have to admit, like, my God, this is really accurate.
It's very strange, actually, Doug, for them to use that word forgery, because it implies that it comes from an original document somewhere.
Right.
So then that's what got me thinking. And not too long ago, just in the last couple of weeks, because I haven't actually looked into the protocols. I've read them many years ago, but it was only until I started looking into Dabrushka, Rudolph, and this later history that I started to say, hey, I better start looking at these protocols. And so I did a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, started looking into where the protocols come from and what document they are forged from. And I came up with this conversation in hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. So what you have there is authoritarian totalitarian versus what? Classic liberal, would you say, for Montesquieu? Sort of not necessarily modern liberalism, but you can see that this is a debate, much like we've been discussing today. So that's one source, a conversation in hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. And so the second source that they point to, and this is really the culmination of this story that I want to present today, comes from another author who they say plagiarized this conversation in hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, except for one chapter that was an original from this secondary source. And what is that chapter called but the Jewish Cemetery in Prague? So that sent chills down my spine when I started to realize that. Okay, now what's also interesting is that the company that published the first English version of the Protocols of Zion is in Boston, and the Herbert Small, I can't remember the name, but it's Small something and Co. And it's Herbert Small that we want to focus on here. He dies, he gets ill, dies, and a Brandesian, a close confidant, ally of Brandeis, gets put in as the lead editor. He publishes this protocols in English, while also assisting Brandeis in establishing savings bank life insurance. And he's on efficiency boards. And so you can see that this is pretty wild, that Brandeis is directly connected to the author, or the person that first published the English version of the protocols. So there's obviously more investigation to happen there. that this story goes back to the Maharal of Prague and this Jewish cemetery in the Jewish quarter. And so this myth that they talk about is the Maharal of Prague has these midnight meetings in this Jewish cemetery with the 12 tribes of Israel. This is the story that we're told. And one of those 12 tribes is the Naphtali tribe. And so Naphtali directly connects to Louis Brandeis in that his uncle, the guy that he changed his middle name from David to Dembitz for, is Louis Naphtali Dembitz. So I know that's a lot, but there's direct connections here. And so I just find it fascinating that Louis Brandeis, the guy that really started to impose so much of what was written in the protocols, is actually working side by side at the exact same time with this guy that publishes the first English version.
Yeah, that's a fascinating tidbit, actually, just to realize that somebody so closely connected to Louis Brandeis was publishing this thing.
Yep.
That kind of reveals that it's got a little bit more authenticity than they typically want to give it.
Yeah, right. And that's what lends the authenticity. And the reason why we cannot ignore it any longer is because of what it says in there and how alike it is to our modern society. And if this was published in the 1800s originally, well, then we've got a very fascinating historical artifact to look into. So this diagram was handed to me from a viewer after watching some of my work and said, yeah, progressivism, according to this chart, you can see is used to infiltrate our traditions.
Can you share the chart? I can't see it.
Oh, yep. Thank you. Thank you. Hang on.
They really are using this. I mean, what you were just showing, well, with the World's Fair, but also with the Walt Disney stuff, is the way that they're imposing their vision of the future on us. And then they're getting up, like, it's like, I mean, what is that concept that they're making us imagine the future that they want us to bring about, and then we bring it about for them? Because they've manufactured this thing and they've taken control of our future by presenting us with, through science fiction and these other things. I mean, we're living it now. I mean, the concept of artificial intelligence, all these concepts of these robots, and you know, the internet, or the brain internet interfaces, and all these things have come out of science fiction that's were written by progressives 100 years ago, or 120, 30 years ago. Yep. And now it's that future. We have all worked to create that future that they envisioned.
I have a question.
That they can replace us with robots, basically, is what seems to be happening literally as we speak.
I have a question about this exact thing, because this is what I'm seeing as well. And I'm always wondering, like, what do you think their angle is? We know a lot of these guys, the foundation of this whole system is psychology. They're always looking at what the public reaction is going to be to certain things that they implement, especially what we're talking about here. Their predictive programming is for us. So what is the outcome to certain things? And what I've always been interested in, ever since I was very, very interested in the UFO UAP topic and how it's suddenly mainstream over the past 10 years now. It has been 10 years now, ever since David Fravor walked on Joe Rogan and made it mainstream and started talking about disclosure. And now we have this whole generation, multiple generations of completely disenfranchised people who have been told they're crazy. And now it completely shifts into they are the new alternative media rock stars. They're the ones, we're having CIA agents on, they have their own podcasts now. It's a form of controlled opposition and predictive programming with it. It's all together, and it's in a form I've never seen before in history. It's magnified, and this predicting the future, they gave us everything we thought we wanted, and now we're creating it for them. And now we're allowing them to just be the hosts on every channel now. It's very strange. I never thought that conspiracy theorists would be like leading the charge of propaganda, but they're having all of these guys on their shows constantly, and it's very interesting. It's just an observation, you know.
These guys are masters of co-opting organic movements and then
Oh, yeah.
creating controlled opposition through these dialectics. Or it's like that's how they herd us towards the future that they want. And it's so frustrating when you can observe it. And I mean, in my feeling, the only way to get beyond it is for people to get their critical thinking capacities back, be able to have these conversations and be able to be open-minded enough to be open to different ideas and learn how to use. I mean, Duane, back in the day, I think one of the conversations we had on my podcast was about the trivium. Like, start using the trivium again, learn the logical fallacies, care about the quality of your thinking and your critical thinking capacities, and then evolve as a human being beyond this cage that has been built around you. And it's because they're masters of psychological manipulation. I mean, and they've been playing this game, I think, for thousands of years. I mean, we talk about, I would agree, that Abrahamic religions were the propaganda from 2,000 years ago. And now they're replacing those propaganda, that old propaganda technique with the new propaganda technique, which is progressivism. Nice.
Right.
These are just ways to herd the colonized into building the empire, while they believe they're liberating themselves, you know.
So you mentioned trivium, Doug. So this is beautiful. This is the education that they removed from our education model, right? Grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the ability to put words together in sentences, into paragraphs, into compositions that help people understand what you're saying. So this is why they covet all of these other guys, the ones that rise to the top under our education system. They covet those, bring them in to their fold, and teach them the liberal arts, because the liberal arts, you now can live a life, not make a living. Now, there's a big difference between living a life and making a living. So when you look at John Taylor Gatto and Charlotte Iserbyt and the foundations of Western education, they say that we were deliberately dumbed down by specifically the removal of the liberal arts, grammar, logic, rhetoric, but also music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. So what are those but to understand our world? So if we don't understand our world, we'll never be able to identify who our enemy is. And then we're 2 steps away from solutions.
And we won't have to, because the experts will tell us.
Well, that's just it. That's the whole point. So they've taken your critical thinking capacity as an individual to be a strong sovereign being, and they've replaced it with the expert. So you either do what the expert, that's a cult, right? This whole thing, this appeal to authority, this appeal to the expert, this is the cult of progressivism, where they've taken control of the education system and they've brainwashed 95% of the population into believing that if they don't do what the expert says, if they don't believe what the experts say, then they're wrong. They're going to get an F on the test. You know, they're going to be shamed in front of everybody because they're not going to know what they're talking about.
There's several books you can get.
Duane's got multiple copies of the Trivium.
This one's really good for kids, because it's
a lot of
imagery. This would be definitely something to buy to start to introduce your children to this. Homeschoolers out there, this is it.
Yeah, cool.
I've been looking for that.
And it comes with the quadrivium.
And a lot of people don't even
teach children early. And then guess what they did? They wrote a fake one.
Oh yeah,
Marshall McLuhan wrote
Mr. Marshall. And you know how he was introduced to me by another social engineer named Terrence McKenna, who was obsessed with McLuhan's work.
Right, and he was CIA for sure. I mean, people laugh at that, but that is 100%.
You know what you can also do as well is get yourself down to yourbias.is and print yourself off some of these logical fallacy cards. Get them laminated, and then you can just like slam them in people's faces while you're talking to them. You know,
it's so difficult to even be familiar with proper etiquette in argument and discussion, because most likely the other person's not going to be. So even when you call out things that are properly like incorrect or don't argue that way, that's not it doesn't matter. They're just going to tell you you're you're mansplaining or something
Yeah,
like
right.
that. It's going to go over their head anyway and claim that they don't don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, that's what happens when somebody who's been indoctrinated and they're having a logical argument with somebody else, where a person who engages in critical thinking can hear new information and then they have to incorporate it into their worldview, and then they could change their mind, right? Because maybe it is new information. They have to incorporate it. They've changed. A person who's been indoctrinated, when new information that's outside of their paradigm it comes into their field, they get triggered, and they'll literally like have an emotional reaction. They'll get anxious. They'll try to start weaseling their way out of the conversation. They might just blank out. They'll blank out the conversation. I mean, there's all kinds of coping mechanisms that they'll engage in to avoid having to receive the new information at all costs, like as if their life depends on it. And that's what happens when people have been indoctrinated, which is exactly what the Prussian model of education is designed to do, is indoctrinate people into a belief system that they can't then, without deprogramming, like literal psychological deprogramming, you can't break free of it.
Yeah. Hilarious too that Andy, you mentioned calling out them, and hilarious that Nick brings these cards, because man, I live by these. I give these to people. The call out card, your thinking is bad and you should feel bad. If you've been given this card, it's because the things you said were so full of fallacies and dodgy logic that it would take too long to identify all of them.
Right.
You'll need to print off a lot of these.
That's great.
Incredible. So this is how we fight back when you want solutions. Well, sorry, it's going to require some work. That's a 4-letter word to a lot of people, but I'm telling you, man, once you start to infuse a lot of this thinking into your life, you start to think much better. You start to be less angry or upset or frustrated about things, because you know you can start to work it better. You can start to think and talk better. You can now all of a sudden where maybe you faced roadblocks in conversations with people, you can actually step over those and get into real conversations. I've seen this myself, but it's all in how you present things, the words that you use. You have to stay out of words like debunked, use discredited, right? Mm-hmm. Don't use their language like they stole fake news from us. We were talking about fake news for 20 years prior to the mainstream coming out and pointing fake news at us.
They stole the concept of being awake in a sleeping world, you know? The Matrix was our shit.
Yeah.
But actually, as it turns out, it seems maybe not.
Yeah.
You know?
So we are reaching
the term woke, and it was like, we've been using the term awake or waking up, you know, for a decade, and now you're going to call yourselves woke. It's like, they really do. They take the language, they twist the language.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can't have a conversation anymore that can get these ideas across. Literally, it's amazing.
This is a total sidetrack, but have you guys noticed or heard that red pill is now a like dating young person term? And it basically, it's so removed from what, you know, the concept of red pill used to mean. It's unreal. It's just rooted in the idea that anyone that thinks alternatively, right, is an incel basement dweller who hates women.
Right.
So it connects that way to like the Andrew Tate world. I think that's what Andrew Tate. That was his you know, that was his agenda, right? That was part of his plan. He was on the payroll for that.
Yeah. So we are nearing the end here. So I'm not sure how many pictures I got left, but we'll get through them and then we can finish this discussion. But you can see here on this chart how they've played this all out. And from my research, this is pretty accurate. This comes from the Weimar Frankfurt School. You know, Frankfurt School comes to Columbia famously in the 30s, 1 year after the 303 scholars. I just shared this on Facebook. So Rockefeller pays for all of these Jews to come over, including Lewin, the famous psychologist, but also Horkheimer, Adorno. These are the founders of critical theory. They all come over and establish the new school, or the university in exile at Columbia in back-to-back years. So you can see they then infiltrate through social science. They're using mass media and corporations and international banks. and it all funnels through the idea of progressivism. And what does it do but overthrows our traditions, religion, family, nation, property, all of these things. And I would include the nation state as something that, I mean, I would classify myself as an anarchist. I want to have as little government as possible.
Yeah.
But living in a nation state, I would rather have than living in this proposed international world.
Duane, where is this this graph from?
It was a Facebook friend of mine gave it to me, and I
Okay.
can't remember their name. It's at least a couple years ago now.
Email me a copy, please.
Quite a lot of connections
Yeah.
made there.
Yeah, really incredible, right?
I'll
Mass
just mention
immigration.
as well, another book recommendation I got from you is Weimar on the Pacific. This one
Yes.
here by Erhard Barr,
Yep.
German exile culture in Los Angeles and the
Yep.
crisis of modernism.
Beautiful.
And this is kind of like, I don't know, it's the inversion of Operation Paperclip almost, isn't
Yep.
it? What
It's
happened
the-
here?
It's the intellectual, scholarly, academic infusion into America in the exact same way they brought over these rocket scientists, Operation Paperclip. You can see it's the
Right.
exact same, and Baer admits that in that book. And once you get into that book, you see that Aldous Huxley's hanging out with Horkheimer and Adorno, right? These are the guys that create the War of the Worlds broadcast at the Princeton Radio Research Project, freaking everybody out. And who's behind that but Adorno, Horkheimer, Lazarsfeld? He comes directly from Vienna. These are all Jewish Marxists. It's great. I love it. I know I don't think we need to say much more, do we?
It's crazy. And that area itself, the H.G. Wells shit, that
Yeah.
is like a whole other area of research that I do, which is the root of the modern spaceman alien invasion sort of thing that has been going on,
Right.
which, as you know, we said earlier, the old gods, all of it going back, this whole thread going back to the Abrahamic religions, most likely as well. It's still going on today, but we need new gods. We need new invisible threats. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we are just about at the end here, and this famous guy that you mentioned here earlier at the Jewish cemetery, Andy.
Oh, let's share this. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to just finish up here. So probably a couple more minutes. So we should be looking at a family tree, descendants of Sulkind Brandeis. This is the Brandeis family going back into the 1800s, okay, from Sulkind Brandeis. And I'm not entirely sure who that is, but you can see it involves all of these names. And then this name shows up, the Epsteins. So start to wonder, right? Is Jeffrey Epstein sort of related to any of this? And through the latest leak or
Right.
dump or whatever you want to call it, out came some pictures of him. And where is he? But at this Jewish cemetery in Prague.
No way.
Okay, so here's pictures that were released from that data dump involving Epstein. Here is the Jewish cemetery from where the protocols come from. Here's Epstein standing there, and he quite possibly could be standing right in front of the Maharal's tombstone.
Wow.
Okay, here's clearer. I mean, we could be looking at CGI, but man, I don't think so. I think that's a legit picture.
It's not an area of interest. This cemetery doesn't give the light bulb effect like it does for you to most people. I don't think.
Right.
You know, this is
So-
just another. I don't know.
Just obscure detail.
It's too inside baseball to be like
Right.
a thing that they're throwing out there as AI, like just a, you know what I mean?
I see what
Just
you're
to
saying.
mess with the four of us today.
Right, yeah. And so Epstein shows up there in Prague, and he meets officials. I'm not sure who that is, if it's like the president of, he's the Slovak Prime Minister, Robert Fico. And he says, don't worry about what they're doing because it's purely administrative.
Yep.
See that? So
And
this
not to discount
Cool to do
the
it.
nasty shit that he was involved in that's being publicized, but that's
Right.
the only thing that's being publicized.
right.
And
And so I think that that's a great example of how they gatekeep, right? There's all this sensational stuff about Epstein and the Epstein Island and who's on it and everything. And there's probably a ton of truth to that.
sure.
But ultimately, how they're controlling society is through administrative law and all the things that you don't see.
Right.
or all the
Well, that's-
boring things that aren't sensational and aren't headline grabbing, right? It's boring to look into a group that's called the something association of whatever.
Right.
You think
Right.
that's not going to be spicy. No one's going to tune into my live stream if I talk about that.
Yeah,
So
man.
people go after the sensational, like crazy stuff that gets people riled up and angry and outraged, and that's what gets the clicks and the views, right? But actually, the truth is in the documentation and the kind of boring nooks and crannies that most people think, well, why would I even look there?
Well, what does William Penn say? But passion is the mob of the man that plays a riot upon his reason. So as long as you keep them passionate about something, they're not going to be reasonable. They're not going to be rational. They're going to be irrational.
Mhm.
And so I think I end it here with the Interfaith Alliance Church. Well, the present CEO and chairman is Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. He is president and CEO of Interfaith Alliance, and what is that but bringing all different religions into one? An ordained Baptist minister, Reverend Rauschenbusch. He's changed his name here because his father is Walter Rauschenbusch, the father of the social gospel. He's a longtime leader in the interfaith movement, working to protect an inclusive vision of religious freedom for people of all faiths and none. As the great-grandson of the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, and great-grandson of Baptist theologian Walter Rauschenbusch, a key figure in the social gospel movement, he founded it. Reverend Rauschenbusch's commitment to interfaith advocacy comes in part from his own interfaith background. Now, he is gay with children, so you know
Of course.
how that's possible.
It's got to be the whole package.
Chautauqua Institute, the Center for American Progress, the American Foundation, and the Aspen Institute. He's a commentator on CNN, CBS, ABC, and all the mainstreams. Okay? So that's where this movement of progress has gotten us. The elimination of all Abrahamic religions and really all religions into this interfaith alliance of one world religion, of which I would imagine that the Jews, the chosen ones, will be in control of.
Another Walter as well. So that's Disney, Lippman, and this character. I'm
Right.
I'm just gonna start writing off any
Yeah.
Walters that I ever meet.
Don't name your kid Walter.
You should go as Walter White for Halloween.
Yeah, I just need the hat.
So there you
Make it
go.
a small one.
That's it. And
Oh, that
another
was-
thing. What are they called in Disney but the Imagineers?
Right,
And
right.
so that's a portmanteau of imagination and engineering. So there, it's disguised under this child sort of perspective, but also look at Britney Spears and all of, NSYNC and Justin Timberlake and all of this thing. It's all the Mickey Mouse Club. So these singers are actually psyops. Really, ultimately, when you start to see the history of progress, it's very easy to see when Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears come out and kiss each other in the 90s on stage with Madonna standing there. It's a passing of the torch into, furthering the hedonistic impulses, this Jeremy Bentham chasing of pleasures and the pursuit of happiness. It keeps us distracted from all of this. And this is really today, we're midday on Saturday. Most people are out there chasing pleasures. So I commend all of those that are here, including you to open yourselves up to this history, to learn who is controlling us so that we can make more effective and successful moves in our own life.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody tuning into this. This was a very good turnout.
Cool,
And
man.
I hope people had some eye-opening situations, and hope it confirmed some things for some people. Hope it gave you more questions too, because that's always welcome. I have another question, because a lot of this that Duane and I have talked about for a long time kind of started to bring up a memory of someone I had on my podcast years ago. And it was kind of an offshoot topic that he brought up to bring up something else. But have you ever heard of the City Beautiful movement from the early turn of the century? Because it sounds like it has progressivism written all over it.
Yes.
And this comes from, the turn of the 20th century. So it's got to be early on.
So I can tell you about that a little bit. It starts in Washington. That's the first place that they do it. Then they do it in Pittsburgh. And that's just directly associated with the Pittsburgh survey. And then they also started in your hometown of Boston.
Of course, everything's in my backyard.
Yeah. And then they move it So we know the Washington Mall, that was all created out of the City Beautiful movement, but this is also out of these World's Fairs. Like they create the City Beautiful movement in San Francisco, that the fake city, and they make these fake cities. And it's some more preconditioning programming to accept whatever future that comes at us. But yeah, City Beautiful movement is huge in this.
Speaking of inversion and, how they popularize certain versions of conspiracies to take the trail off of the real deal. It's interesting that we've been talking about the World's Fairs so much, and yet we didn't mention ancient empires. We didn't mention electric towers that power giant crafts. We didn't mention mud floods. And yet that is everything that you will find if you look up the World's Fair. That it's interesting because I see a number of really solid content creators that are starting to talk about that, about what a grift the Tartaria thing has been this entire time. And it's easy to kind of verify for yourself when they talk about, oh, well, you can't find the building plans for any of these. They're thousands of years old. No, it's all a grift. But I'm always looking at it like, okay, if it's a grift, what's the point of it? I don't buy people just want to make money off of random ideas they come up with. No, it's very choreographed, and everyone talking about it at a certain point was getting all the views and everything. It's a wave that the community is kind of influenced to ride, and Tartaria has been an ever-going one. It's still going on. And it's funny, they're finally starting to question it. They're getting tons of hate for it. And there's a completely logical reason now, it seems, through this lens, why that topic would even get discussed at all as a conspiracy. Yep. Well, if they start looking at anything to do with the World's Fairs, we better send them this way.
That was the first sense that I got once I started realizing what World's Fairs were, was I started seeing the Tartaria and people claiming that these buildings, like who created these buildings. But I know that a lot of them were built just temporarily out of lath and plaster and torn down. Some of them stayed, which are gargantuan, by the way, because Andy Gerard, our buddy there, went to San Francisco and showed pictures. These buildings are massive.
Oh, yeah.
And I agree that I think that the Tartaria and this World's Fair and all of that is to cover for the real true purpose of the World's Fair, and that is to spread internationalism, the idea of scientific advancement in industry.
Well, they also constantly use begging the question fallacies in those situations. They say, who could have built this? How could this have been done without actually doing any of the research? It's just begging the question over and over again. So that's just a sidetrack, just to say that there's yet another thread to pull, that of course they're controlling both sides of the situation. But Duane, this was a fantastic presentation. I think this was the most encompassing one that we've done together, and I really am glad that everybody could get together for this today. It was really great to have Doug and Nick here with us too. You've gained fans for sure, because I can't wait to check out your channels both individually. And Doug, you mentioned earlier that you think this has been going on for thousands of years, and man, maybe you and I got to have a deep dive on that sometime, because that's my bread and butter, is digging into the ancient world. What narratives may have been going on. And Nick, I love your collection, so I can't wait to check out all your reviews, man. I love the work you're doing. You're doing God's work, man, by saving these books and talking about them.
Thanks, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Duane, you knocked it out of the park. The comments I'm getting. And also, setting this up on StreamYard, as I signed in, there was just a little button which said stream to my channel. So I clicked that, and it's gone out to my channel as well. Super easy. And so my audience have been checking in. I've been sending them over your channels. It works. That's good. That's the first thing. And the people in the comments going crazy. They're loving it. And I've had such a good time. I've got 3 pages of notes, more books to buy. And over the next 150 years, maybe I'll get around to reading them. So sign me up for the life extension. And I don't think it'll be off
we got to
the likes
hijack
of
their
me.
technology.
Well, Yeah, I mean, I hope people get a lot out of this. It's so frustrating out there. Again, like I am tired of arguing with my neighbor. I don't even get a chance to fight the actual imperialists because we'll never get together. They've literally created this this myth of progress that has convinced half of us to fight against our own interests and to fight the ones that are trying to actually liberate us. I mean, that's the most frustrating thing about it to me, is that, and I want to wake people up to the fact that progressivism is a controlled opposition. It's not a working class movement. It never has been. People, I mean, this is the work that Duane's been doing about digging into the history. All you have to do is crack a history book about progressivism, and all you'll find are billionaires pushing it. There's no working class. It's never been a working class movement, people. You know, I even go to the next level and look at, fascism and communism and socialism. These are all different kinds of I call them imperial management systems, that the billionaire class, when they collude, they're trying to figure out how to manage this massive empire, and they'll try it. They'll try one thing here and one thing there, and then have them fight each other and see who wins, right? And the winner's like, wow, then that system's, I actually think that like they were probably blown away at how well fascism was able to create the most powerful military in the world in 10 years. And then it defeated the communists that had been, and they had to bring the Americans in, or else, right? They didn't actually want, I think in my experience, my feeling about the elite, they prefer communism. They really want total control. They just can't make it work because of the economic calculation problem. They can't distribute goods and services without prices and price action. Right. And so they want to have 100% total control, but they've never been able to do it without just starving everybody to death. Right. So that's what I think they're continuing to push for. That's where we're at right now with these data centers and all of this data. They're accumulating everybody's data. It's always about more and more and more data. They didn't have enough data to make the Soviet Union work. Now they have computers, they have the internet, they have the ways to collect the data. They're building the data centers. They're crunching all the numbers with AI so that they can build this 100% surveillance state. I mean, this is the true progress that they're talking about, people. And if we don't start to wake up, I mean, I don't know what it's going to take. It may take a large culling. I mean, they're clearly replacing us with robots as we speak. And so it's like, people, you're running out of time. Start to figure this stuff out.
The whole Judgment Day Terminator thing, what the story doesn't tell is that it's not that the robots and the AI get loose and they just do all the damage. It's the humans programming them to begin with. It's never discussed. It's never a central theme. And that's what's turning out to be the most harsh reality to face right now, is the CEOs literally saying, it's hard to sleep when I know I'm like hiring people to help destroy jobs. And, AI might lead to the end of the world, but until then, we want to do really cool things with it. And, these are not jokes. These aren't sitcoms. These aren't sketches. They're real CEOs of real companies saying this and just nihilistically okay with it all.
And that is the story of the golem. Much like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Frankenstein, and Terminator 2, it's all about this being that runs amok. And I think it's a great analogy to progress because it's got two sides. We can, like, I'm a farmer, but I have solar panels. Right. So there's a balance that we need. It's not a total immersive jump in with both feet into these myths of progress, but it's to have a more nuanced perspective and to question everything still.
Right.
So
I wanted to mention that before we go about Frankenstein, since you just brought it up, because that to me is the ultimate. That's why I could never be a socialist. I mean, we have to understand that socialists, progressives, they're building a Frankenstein monster. They're taking what is natural, a natural free market that evolves based on the individual choices of sovereign, free human beings making choices like in any other natural system, a natural self-organizing system. And they're thinking that they can have power. It's the narcissism. They're the godlike power over this natural system that they're going to create a utopia. right? They're going to create progress because they're the experts and they know what they're talking about. And what they really are is Dr. Frankensteins. And that's what this is going to turn into. And it's going to turn into it real fast unless people start to wake up. So, let's hope that we can get more conversations like this one going on because people need to start figuring it out.
So then, Doug, explain your future plans with your radio program.
Yeah,
I haven't been doing a lot of work lately. I have a plan to start a call-in show program, and I'm hoping to do that in the next month. And I started my radio career probably almost 20 years ago now, just doing an open lines call-in show on the radio in Mendocino County, California. And I thought maybe I'll just get back to my roots, let people call up, talk about whatever they want. I want to call it Talking the Shit. And it's a show for the people, by the people, and of the people. So you can talk about whatever you want. It can go anywhere. And I think that might be the way forward. I mean, I've produced over 120, well over 120 dozens of interviews with experts, quote unquote, trying to get the word out. And it's like, I don't know where we're at right now. I just really feel like people need to start talking. Like having real conversations. And if I have a skill, maybe that's it, is just to be able to moderate a conversation on the internet with anybody that wants to call up about whatever and make it to where we can actually have, I mean, that's the thing that's driving me even more crazy now more than ever. I mean, I preferred it 10 years ago when I was just a crazy conspiracy theorist. And I kind of knew when I went out into the world who I was dealing with and what I was talking to. And these days, with Trump, supposedly the populist president that has clearly turned and become the ultimate controlled opposition on all of us, and then just the way that even I think people's social media algorithms put them in these little boxes, everybody's like feels like they're an authority, but they live in their own little world. And it's like, I'm always like, what are you people talking about anymore? It's impossible, and it's impossible to like cross-pollinate those different worlds. Once you get out of somebody else's algorithm, you can't even have a conversation with them anymore. You're just, I don't know. It seems like in one way, I'm kind of optimistic about the future because I think things are getting so crazy that people are going to have to figure it out and turn it around. But in another way, it's like I said, even more kind of frustrating now than it was 10 or 15 years ago when, you were just the crazy person talking about 9/11 truth.
Yeah, it's the constant question is, do enough people know about history to not repeat it this time? And I don't know what that answer is. But anyway, guys, we got to wrap things up. Thank you all for joining us. I'll get all the information from you guys I already did put your channel information out there. So everybody, thank you so much for listening and tuning in and watching.
Thanks, everybody.
And I definitely hope we can do more things like this.
For
more
sure.
Conversations, more panels. So, you know me, I'm kind of flighty. I'm in and out. I don't always do my show regularly. Like I said, I only do it when I feel like it's important. And this is important, but we got to keep the frequency up a little bit more, I'd say, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
I hear you. Yeah, this was
and
good.
Doug, if you want somebody on your radio program, I can get on there with you for sure.
Hell yeah.
All right, let's do it.
And hey, Doug, Nick, Andy, thank you. Thank you very much for making time to be here. I really appreciate that.
Hell yeah, man. All right,
Thank
go
you,
take care
man.
of your farm.
I will.
Guys.
I will.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right,
guys.
everybody.
Talk to you guys
Take
later.
care. Have a great weekend.